Good morning, everybody. I am calling to order this public hearing of the Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety. I am Councilmember Brooke Pinto, representing Ward 2 and Chairwoman of the committee. The time is 9:50 a.m. on October 23rd, 2025. We are conducting this public hearing in person in room 500 of the John A. Wilson Building and virtually via Zoom. We're also streaming on the DC Council website and on YouTube and X at CM Brooke Pinto. I called this hearing today to provide oversight over how significant power outages are handled by the Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency, or HSEMA, and other district agencies, particularly in light of two major power outages that significantly impacted Ward 2 residents and local businesses in February 2025 and July of 2025, as well as the significant fire experienced in Ward 7 at Pepco's Benning Road facility this September. These issues are particularly salient as the district faces worsening extreme weather and greater strain on our power grid from technological advancements and development, and as international instability and bad actors make us even more vulnerable to the possibility of intentional attacks on our power grid. When the lights go out, it is not just an inconvenience, it is a public safety issue. In recent months, district residents have endured multiple prolonged power outages. We've witnessed failures that have left thousands without power during our coldest and hottest weeks of the year, endangered vulnerable populations who are dependent on medical equipment, and inflicted significant economic losses on businesses and residents. The timeline paints a troubling picture. In February, during freezing winter temperatures, an underground equipment failure led to an explosion and fire near 2100 M Street Northwest that left thousands of residents without power for multiple days. Residents were left without heat as temperatures plummeted. Older residents and families with young children huddled in their houses or were forced to seek other emergency shelter. I spoke to many who left town altogether. The West End Library had to open as a warming center. Some residents, particularly at facilities like the Aston, which serves as a bridge housing model, had to be transported to alternative accommodations because their buildings were simply too cold to be habitable. Another troubling incident occurred over the summer. Beginning July 15th, a series of feeder cable failures triggered a month-long ordeal during the peak of summer heat. Pepco lost 2 of 4 transformers at the 22nd Street substation. The company implemented a proactive customer disconnections by cutting power to 1,800 customers at a time to prevent a total system collapse of overusage. This continued through multiple incidents in July and into August, with repairs not fully completed until August 13th, creating nearly a full month of uncertainty and disruption for district residents and businesses. Again, many of these disruptions were affecting the same residents and businesses who were impacted by the February outage. The summer failures had devastating consequences in the extreme heat. During the height of summer, with heat indices approaching dangerous levels, residents were left without air conditioning. Seniors and individuals with mobility impairments were trapped in buildings when elevators failed. Residents dependent on breathing machines and motorized wheelchairs faced life-threatening situations. Businesses suffered major losses. The Phillips Collection had to cancel its Thursday night events. A medical clinic was forced to dispose of expensive temperature-sensitive products due to strict health regulations. The Ocean Conservancy had to replace dishwashers, fans, and air conditioning units damaged by power surges. What was equally troubling is that Pepco's and HSEMA's response to these crises and what appear to be critical failures in the district's energy infrastructure resilience, emergency response, and communication systems. Key concerns that I plan to explore today include poor communication protocols that left residents and businesses uninformed about planned outages, inaccurate tracking of how many residents were actually affected by outages, the importance of HSEMA's increased involvement in these incidents and follow-up needed, inadequate systems to identify and prioritize customers with medical needs or other special needs, and inconsistent generator deployment policies. I want to acknowledge and thank the many PEPCO workers, member of the IBEW Local 1900, who have worked around the clock in dangerous conditions, including in manholes during extreme heat to restore power. These dedicated employees have shown extraordinary commitment to our community, and I want to thank the PEPCO leadership and government affairs team for all of your responsiveness to me and my team as we continue to explore a new path forward and develop a new game plan. Amazingly, this morning, as we were on our way to this hearing, there was another power outage in the Foggy Bottom area, the same area that experienced those two incidents earlier this year that I spoke about in February and in July. We are still getting to the bottom of what happened, how many people are impacted. PEPCO estimates that at least 130 customers are impacted. And so again, not only do we need to understand what is going on with the infrastructure failures so that we can build in more resiliency to prevent these outages from happening in the first place, we also recognize that anytime an accident happens, we have to have a better communication system in place so that we can communicate with our residents and they can know what is going on and how to be kept safe. Today, we need answers to these processes and we need a new game plan. Additionally, our firefighters and first responders have shown exemplary service when responding to these emergencies, and we are very grateful to them as well. I want to also acknowledge our advisory neighborhood commissioners, Alex Marshall is here today, Matt Johnson, Jeff Ruckauer, and Shrupti Patel, who have diligently shared information and advocated on behalf of our communities throughout this process, and especially with those power outages. We need to understand why oil-filled underground cables are allowed to deteriorate. We're allowed to deteriorate to the point of catastrophic failure. We need to understand why backup systems weren't in place to prevent cascading outages. We need transparency about PEPCO's preventative maintenance schedules and infrastructure investment plans. And importantly, we need concrete commitments for immediate improvements to prevent these failures from continuing in the future. District residents deserve better than hoping that the lights will stay on. They deserve to have a utility company that proactively maintains its infrastructure, communicates effectively during emergencies, and treats every power outage as the potential life or death situation that it can be. Residents deserve to know that DC's emergency agency will respond. Today's hearing is about accountability, but more importantly, it's about ensuring that no district resident has to endure another summer or winter wondering if they will have power when they need it most. So thank you all again for joining us. We're going to follow our normal practice and hear first from our public witnesses, followed by our government witnesses. For our public witnesses, we'll start with those who are here in person, and then we'll turn to those who are joining us virtually. Our public witnesses will all have 3 minutes to present their testimony. Great. We will begin first with Mike Silverstein, public witness, and Commissioner Alex Marshall from ANC 2B05. Are any of you signed up to testify in person publicly? Okay, great. And then we'll also add our virtual witnesses here, Chair Shrupti Patel, Commissioner ANC 2A, Commissioner Jeffrey Ruckauer, ANC 2B02, Valerie Jablow, public witness, Commissioner Lisa Gore, ANC 3G01, Laura Finizzi, Commissioner ANC 3/4G, and Danya Palanker, public witness. Hello, Mr. Silverstein. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Moved at 1301 20th Street Northwest for the past 43 years. 20 of those years I served as an ANC commissioner. My partner and I live on the 7th floor. My first involvement in this was when I called PEPCO after an outage to ask about the status of our power and when it might be restored and what the situation was. They asked for my phone number. I gave it. The Pepco person on the phone told me I was not a customer, so she could not give me any information at all. I eventually got some, but what I learned was if you're in a condo or an apartment building that's single metered and you don't pay directly to Pepco, but pay through your rent or your condo fee, you don't exist to them as a customer, that your building is one customer account and that you don't count. My building, the Lauren condominium, has 168 units, at least 225 residents. We are one customer account. If you look out my window, the flats at DuPont Circle over on my left, 312 units, 400 residents, one customer account. Next to them, Hamilton House, 304 units, 400 customers, one account. You had that same thing with the Apollonet across the street and the Bristol House. 5 apartment buildings, 1,200 plus units, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 residents, and they count as 5 customer accounts. This really does matter because we have been repeatedly informed that DC HACIMA doesn't send out alert DC messages unless Pepco informs them 2,500 customer accounts are affected. These 1,200 plus apartment units outside my window only count for 5 in Pepco's speak. And if HACIMA doesn't notify other DC and federal agencies, one hand doesn't know what the other is doing. And I'll be able to talk about that later in our Q&A because I had some personal issues here with me and my partner just getting up and down and around. We were not told what was going on. They never told us what the situation was in advance, so we could not take steps to ensure our own safety, to leave, to do things that we could, because they weren't open and transparent, nor was the DC government. And newspapers, radio, television, they don't see a DC alert, so that an alert DC, so they don't think it's anything going on. The only information we got in our area was from Brian Romanowski of your staff and Alex Marshall, who was going around posting things on telephone poles to let people know what the status of it was. Our lights are out. There are people, as you said, who are seniors, who are in buildings, or people who have special needs because of medical conditions, who didn't know what was going on. I don't particularly want an apology from HACIMA or an apology from Pepco. I just want you to acknowledge that you fell short here, that this is something that is likely to happen again. It happened this morning. And that you will find ways to speak the same language on when to do alerts and when to notify agencies. I have a lot more to say, but 3 minutes is now 4. We'll talk about my own personal situation, hopefully, in the Q&A. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Silverstein. Commissioner Marshall?
Good morning, and I likewise have well more than 3 minutes. Great. I likewise have well more than 3 minutes, and we'll try to get through what I can. So I'm the commissioner for ANC 2B05 and vice chair of 2B. My SMD was immediately adjacent to the February outage, and much of it was impacted by the July outages. I'm not here to lament that the outages occurred, but to share ways that Pepco and the government of the District of Columbia failed to communicate to residents who were affected by the outages and provide immediate relief, especially during extreme weather. The outage in February was during frigid cold with temperatures in the low 20s and high 30s for the highs and lows. From the start, Pepco and the district did not conduct substantial communication efforts to affected residents. Residents were told by Pepco frontline workers that power may not return for 5 days, and they turned to each other and commissioners asking how long to expect to be without power, not knowing whether they should stay with a friend, book a hotel, as there was no public information except for the existence of the blackout. Seniors and those with disabilities in high-rise apartments were unsure whether they'd be physically able to return to their floor if they went out to get food. ANC 2B began requesting specific actions by Pepco and district government to support affected residents, including outreach from DACL to affected seniors, use of constituent services funds when they exist, to pay for high-risk residents to stay in hotels, extended hours at the West End Library, robocalls and text messages to affected residents, and visits to large apartment buildings to share information with management. Few of those were acted on, including none by Pepco. Although Pepco did state that outbound calls were made, I've yet to find a single person who received them. Pepco brought in large generators on trucks. They were only hooked up to commercial buildings. Notably, these outages, both the February and July ones, primarily occurred on weekends. And so these commercial buildings that were being powered were offices that were sitting vacant. I repeatedly asked if there was an ability to provide generators to residential buildings and did not receive any responses to that request other than that it might not be possible. I also asked that since we were paying for hotels to be powered, notably the Ritz-Carlton, a luxury hotel, if Pepco and district government could lean on them and say, given that we are powering you, we would like you to be able to hold some of our high-risk residents, seniors, people with disabilities during these extreme weather events. That request fell on deaf ears, among other things. As Mike mentioned, there are significant issues with non-account holders being able to access information from Pepco. This is something that we talked about Pepco with in February and March and July. Just last night, I tested the line again. No changes to that. You still cannot access Pepco's number without being an account holder yourself. Lastly, I'd like to focus on that district government also did not act in this, and we requested presence on the ground in the neighborhood through constituent services staff, representatives from various agencies to talk to people affected, because people just needed to know what was going on and what to expect. And there was a complete failure in that until ANC 2B took it to media and the streets to call Pepco out. I've got more to share that I can talk about during questions and answers, and I'm also happy to provide a copy of a lengthier version of my remarks.
Thank you, Commissioner. And yes, please submit both of your testimony for the record so we can have the full version as well. Chair Trupti Patel, Commissioner ANC 2A.
Good morning, Councilwoman Pinto. My name is Trupti Patel, she, her pronouns. I am the chairperson of ANC 2A. I am a fourth-term ANC commissioner that represents single-member District 2A03, which is the bulk of the historic Foggy Bottom. The irony is that the morning of this hearing, I received several text messages from several of my constituents saying, just wanted to let you know the power went out again. It went out at 5:15 this morning. I have residents constantly texting me at this point, expressing frustration and anger because once again, they feel like, what did Pepco do? What did Pepco solve? Because this seems to be the same bad show rerunning itself once again. And, you know, to echo Commissioner Emeritus Silverstein, no one's looking for an apology. No one's looking, you know, for sympathy in this point. At this point, we want accountability, and you know, I am frankly angry on behalf of my residents. They are furious because they feel like the government has failed them. All of you, Pepco has failed. HCMA has failed. The council has failed. Does no one not give a damn about them? That's literally what I'm being told this morning. As a matter of fact, one of my constituents who is a realtor is now facing the possibility of his housing sale falling through for his client. And the client responded, he says, is this power outage a joke? And the constituent had to tell the client, no, this is not a joke. There's a housing inspection that now has to be rescheduled and endangers that contract now being finalized. And the person on the other end of the line, who's the seller of the house, said, this is happening in Brooke Pinto's Ward 2. Like, this is the narrative that is now being spun. You know, it is the commissioners on the ground, such as myself, Commissioner Ruckgauer, Commissioner Marshall, Commissioner Johnson. We are sitting here fighting tooth and nail, and we're not getting paid for any of it. And we're not asking to get paid for any of this, but it's just kind of like everybody dismisses us. And we're tired of it. My constituents are tired of it. We shouldn't have to be sitting here begging resources for our neighbors. Right now, I am worried about our elderly constituents being able to stay warm. If they can't stay warm, what's the plan? Every time we've asked Pepco for some kind of amenity, can you knock off something off their bill because you're charging them for a utility they never had access to? People have lost food. People have to make decisions on if they can stay in their homes or if they need to be rehoused somewhere. And so I hope this hearing is not performative. I don't want to come here to vent and be angry. And I am pretty angry on behalf of my constituents. What I want to know and what I want to hear from Pepco and from you, Councilwoman, what are the next steps? What are the concrete deliverables that are going to solve these problems? Because I don't think you'll like the grassroots reaction that can come next. Because frankly, Pepco deserves to be sued and they should pay damages to every person and individual in the district they've harmed. I yield back the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Jeffrey Ruckauer, ANC 2B02. Commissioner, you're still muted.
Sorry about that. I'll skip over what I was going to say about the other parts that have already been articulated, and I'll just focus on suggestions for improvement. First of all, district regulations and Pepco policies clearly need overhaul and need to be addressed sooner rather than later. While DuPont has experienced largely stable electrical service, as we've just learned, we can have problems, problems elsewhere in the city can have serious consequences for us. Pepco and the district must improve inspection, maintenance, and oversight of our critical electrical distribution network. The problems that blew out by the 11th Street feeder cable should have been recognized long before they occurred. And that they shouldn't have been, if they were aware of them, they should not have been deferred to some later phase of repair. Pepco needs to shift from basing alert decisions on the number of customers to the number of residents. If Pepco does not currently at least have information about the number of units at service addresses, it can be obtained from various public sources. They can also engage with customers to fill in this information. Even after I explained this distinction to multiple reporters, using my building example, one customer, but 250 units with about 375 residents, they continue to underreport the extent of impact. This is simply not helpful to anyone. Pepco should have a communications liaison available as soon as possible to coordinate with ANCs, large property owners, and businesses. ANCs can handle communication with their neighbors and constituents, but we need to have a heavy lift from Pepco. Means of allowing non-customers to report outages, check on status, and receive outage alerts isn't required. This should be coordinated with DHS-EMA. Non-customers having a special medical or mobility need must be accounted for and prioritized in restoration efforts whenever possible. Determining which buildings get what generating support needs to be done well before an incident. Pepco needs to publish its determining criteria and work with stakeholders to ensure the allotment is equitable so properties that need emergency generation receive it and that support generators are made as widely available as possible. Commercial office buildings not related to primary or emergency healthcare services should not receive generators. The district must also take action to manage and balance energy demands. Encourage energy conservation by residents, businesses, and institutional customers. Encourage and support conversion of appliances HVAC to highly efficient energy versions. We hope that this year's woes won't repeat anytime soon, but we must not count on that being the case. We must take reasonable action now to be prepared if this happens again in DuPont or anywhere else in the district. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Valerie Jablot, public witness.
Thank you. I am Valerie Jablow, testifying as a Capitol Hill resident and DC taxpayer since 1991. Thus far in 2025, Capitol Hill has had numerous power outages with no wind, no storm, and no warning. I personally, along with blocks of my neighbors, have experienced 4 such outages this year, 2 in February and 2 in October, together lasting more than 6 hours. For each, Pepco's outage map showed more than 1,000 customers affected. Those 4 2025 outages were more than I have had at my single-family house in the last 25 years. About a mile east of my house, also on Capitol Hill, the 1300 block of East Capitol Street experienced many hours of power outages in May and June that resulted from power surges which damaged and ruined appliances. A friend who lives there told me they spent $2,000 in repairs while a neighbor spent $10,000. They also reported that Pepco claimed no responsibility. After my February outages, my ANC chair asked Pepco to explain what happened. In response, Pepco demanded that we show the dates, duration, and locations of each outage. I then wrote to the DC Public Service Commission and asked them to get Pepco to explain. On March 3rd, the commission emailed me and said they would ask Pepco and that the utility had 14 days to respond. 6 weeks later, having heard nothing, I again asked the DC Public Service Commission for an explanation from Pepco. That same day, the commission sent me an excerpt of what Pepco had sent them at some time prior. It said that in both February outages, a quote, heater tripped, unquote. The first was attributed to, quote, underground equipment failure, unquote. The second had an unknown cause. Despite my asking, I had not heard anything from the DC Public Service Commission about October's outages. The morning after our last October outage, one of my neighbors called Pepco's customer service line and after 5 minutes of waiting was hung up on. That happened twice. When I called Pepco's 24-hour emergency line to report one of my February outages, I didn't have my account number handy, so I was given a choice of using my phone number or my social security number. I dialed the latter in once, then again, without any recognition, despite my being a Pepco customer for nearly 4 years. When a live person finally responded, she asked me for my name, notably what Pepco's automatic emergency line doesn't ask for. When the customer service person found my account, the first thing she did was note that I had paid my bills, so my service was not turned off. All of this indicates something incredibly wrong happening at Pepco. These problems and apparent lack of oversight take a real human toll. One of my neighbors has a breathing machine, another had to have their heater repaired after an outage, yet another had to crawl upstairs in the dark to find a phone to call the outage in, but was unsuccessful because my neighbor did not have their account handy. All of those neighbors are more than 80 years old. I ask now that you demand Pepco and the DC Public Service Commission, 1, explain all the power outages DC residents have experienced in 2025, including causes, repairs, and assurance of future security. 2, provide clarity about reimbursement due to surges and outages. And 3, do all of that in a timely and publicly accessible manner by the end of 2025. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Lisa Gore, ANC 3G01.
Good morning, Chairperson Pinto and members of the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety. My name is Lisa Gore. I am Chairperson of ANC 34G01 and a Commissioner for ANC 34G001 that serves Hawthorne and Barnaby Woods. Thank you for having this hearing today, and especially thank you for allowing the residents of Chevy Chase to testify. On August 1st through the 2nd, a tree contact on a Pepco feeder triggered an outage affecting roughly 300 customers in wards 3 and 4. During and following restoration, residents experienced power surges. A Pepco representative later acknowledged the system had voltage fluctuations even before the tree fell. Neighbors reported thousands of dollars in damage to air conditioners, thermostats, appliances, and electronics. The record reflects a slow on-scene response to an active wires down hazard. Pepco arrived approximately 75 minutes after the initial notifications, along with troubling indications of backfeed and prolonged arcing, all of which point to technical and operational lapses, inconsistent with standard of care. I am going to allow the commissioner of that S&D to give you more details about the experience of the neighborhood. I want to focus on how agencies in a district can strengthen their oversight and learning. For example, the Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency and the Office of Unified Command should integrate wires down and active arcing into Joint Incident Command to ensure rapid unified response and situational awareness. The Department of Energy and the Department of Buildings should coordinate post-event guidance and targeted inspections for homes with suspected neutral or grounding damage. The Office of the Attorney General should monitor claims handling by PEPCO for unfair practices and ensure residents are informed of their appeal rights. Additionally, establish an incident transparency response in law, required standardized action reporting, set response time benchmark for wires down and active arching incidents, including weekend and after hours with public reporting by ward. Who is coordinating on-scene control and public safety during these events? What role did HSEMA, Emergency Operations Center, play, as well as Alert DC, to warn residents of these incidents? Create uniform fair claim standards, codify and demand clear submission instructions, decision timelines, and evidentiary criteria. We should bar blanking act of God denials where utility operations or system conditions controlled or contributed to that harm, and provide a public safety commission supervised appeal process and pathway. How many surge damage claims have been submitted, approved, or denied, and on what grounds and in what time frame? And will PEPCO pause act of God denials, particularly in our case, pending the Public Service Commission findings, who just as of yesterday agreed to open an investigation into our incident? Who is monitoring this process for DC consumers? How are DC consumers expected to navigate this complicated process by themselves? And finally, mandate proactive risk reduction and accessible communications. And Councilmember Pinto, you touched on this. In coordination with DDOT Urban Forestry, require targeted vegetation management, document corrective actions on high-risk circuits, direct DOEE and DOB to issue post-event guidance and arrange targeted inspections for suspected grounded and neutral issues, and ensure multilingual, accessible emergency advisories for seniors and medically vulnerable residents throughout standard challenges, including potential use of Alert DC. In conclusion, I want to thank you again. I'm a little over time, so thank you for the extra grace, and I'll answer questions during question and Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Laura Finizzi, Commissioner ANC 3/4G.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to testify. As Commissioner Gore spoke, we had an outage on August 1st and 2nd that significantly impacted our neighborhood. Although the numbers may seem smaller, 300 compared to some of the numbers in Ward 7 and 8, the amount of damage per person was significant. Of the approximately 30 people that we've found going door to door and interviewing people, the average amount of damage to their house is $2,500, with some up into $15,000. And I'd just like to start off by saying that PEPCO is granted a monopoly. I assume the purpose of this monopoly is to reduce them from having to do competitive practices that would cut into necessary maintenance and infrastructure upgrade, right? That monopoly is a privilege, and with that privilege comes the responsibility to provide excellent service, and they are not doing that right now. What we saw in our neighborhood was horrible. We had a tree that fell down, and then not on that block, but blocks away, wires fell, transformers popped. We had arcing fire so bright and so long that it burned holes through the concrete. We had sparks showering down on children and their babysitter as they were walking. We had no pack, which is the big, thick cable of wire that is very reliable. Even when a tree falls, the pack can stand up. There was no pack run on that wire. And then, as Lisa Gore reported, we had backfeeding, we had power surges, and also one of our residents reported under voltages. He happened to have a multimeter in his home, and being a computer engineer and a geeky type person, self-admittedly, he kept taking readings and found that the voltage was consistently between 50 and 60 volts for hours, which, and talking to an appliance store, can cause appliances to have to work overtime and then burn out the appliances, which is what we saw. So at the same time that Pepco's infrastructure was failing, and we also saw when this was reported to Pepco, there was a real lack of urgency and transparency. They were rejecting claims within 24 hours. They called everything an act of God. They didn't collect any data. We went door to door, made a Google map, mapped all the data. They did not. They did not advertise this like as a public event and tried to examine and analyze what went wrong. We collected it. We got testimony. We got all the data collated together, worked with the OPC, worked with our residents to submit testimony to OPC, had a meeting with Pepco. They refused to release the video of that meeting, even though they had agreed to do it. Then we worked together to put an ANC resolution together, press the Public Service Commission to hold a hearing, all of this to force Pepco to do the job that it should be doing because it has a monopoly. When things go wrong, you figure out what happened, because otherwise we have no assurance that it won't happen again. And in fact, last Wednesday, October 15th, we had inexplicable surges. People reported popping, buzzing sounds, and outages again. I would also like to say that, yes, while vegetation management is an issue, it shouldn't mean that we remove all the trees. That is one thing that I think Pepco is pushing for, is removing all tall trees within 50 feet of a power line. We need to look at undergrounding our power, especially in cases where the large tree canopy trees have come down, because that would give us more sustainable power and also produce that tree canopy, which is going to provide us shade and not strain the power grid. Thank you for letting me go in overtime. I appreciate the grace.
Thank you. Dania Pollinker, public witness. Dania, are you here?
Sorry, I did not take mute off. There we go. Hi, so I'm Danya Palenker. I want to thank you for having me join today. I am a longtime resident of the District of Columbia and currently reside on Barnaby Street in one of the houses that was affected by this downed wire on August 1st that you just heard about. And I want to talk some about that incident, although it was smaller in scale, I believe, than some of the prior pieces you talked about. It raised a number of concerns, not just about the private property that was damaged during this process, but about public safety, particularly about Pepco's reaction when live power lines are down. So I live at 6501 Barnaby Street. This is 3 blocks from where the tree fell, and according to Google Maps, that's about a third of a mile. When the tree fell down, the tree fell down, and about a half an hour later, a neighbor across the street texted me and some other neighbors to note that they had heard a loud pop and that it appeared that the power line in front of our house, in front of my house, had fallen down, that they had ripped off the post, and there was a bright blue flash of light. There was a small fire that started a couple houses down from me. I returned to Barnaby Street about 10 minutes after that, around 12:40 p.m. At that point, Barnaby Street in front of our house was still open. The police and fire department were there, but there was nobody, at least that I saw in our area, from Pepco. There were live wires that were down on a tree, on the sidewalk in front of our property, and in our yard. And there was smoke coming from that wire in the tree continuously. It was not a major storm that day, although there had been a lot of rain in previous days. But it did rain some, and the ground was wet. And that is an issue that keeps standing out at me because, you know, my daughter and I got out of our car, started to walk on the street towards our house. A firefighter pointed out that she needed to go inside or change shoes because she was in flip-flops. And if her feet touched the street, that there was a significant electrocution risk. And then there was a fire on around 1:20 p.m. when that power line, well, first of all, there were flames. I noticed flames in the trees around 1:20. And then at around 1:25, the wire fell. It hit the paving stone in front of our house, and there was a very large fire. I know I'm running out of time, but I'm gonna see if you guys can. Oh, I'm sorry, my I've got a I've got the fuzziness going on, but I can share links in written testimony to some videos and share some pictures of the fire that happened because it burned a deep hole in our paving stone. The power line, the outside, you know, everything that protects, you know, everything from it was completely melted away. There was like stone that had or something that had turned to glass all over that area. And it still took hours for the power to get turned off. And the police and fire said they had no idea. They don't get informed when Pepco will get there. Neighbors on the other side of the creek behind our house were apparently having fires and smoke coming from surge protectors, and the power was still on at our house. So for us, I have to say it's a lot less an issue, you know, for that. I was happy once the power got turned off. You know, for our house, it was off overnight, which was kind of expected when that happens. Without
Ms.
power line.
Pollinker, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
to interrupt.
Yeah,
Very
so I was, yeah.
I'm so sorry
you.
that happened, and thank you for
You're welcome.
sharing that example with us. Very important to know. And if there's anything you want to submit with your testimony, like including those photographs, so we have them for the record, that would be great.
I will.
Thank you very much. I want to turn back to you, Mr. Silverstein, to talk a little bit about your experience, especially with communications. You talked a little bit about trying to get information from Pepco during the outages.
Well, first is the runaround that we got here that really we would have gotten out of Dodge had we known. Pepco knew immediately that damage that occurred at 10th and Monroe was serious. And when the subsequent failure occurred at 22nd and N, they had to know the scope of this matter and the possibility that the real possibility of further outages. But no one leveled with us. And had you done so, we would have gotten out of Dodge. And I want to explain why. I don't run our place. Rocket does. He's our dog. He's our rescue. He's 10 years old, and he's a sweet guy who's trained us perfectly. And we have a deal. I take him out 3 times a day to water the grass. And if I don't, he'll water the carpet. So when the power failed, I had to walk Rocket down 7 flights, down an emergency stairwell. I held onto his leash with one hand and held onto the railing with the other hand. But the emergency lights in the stairwell are battery operated, and the batteries last only 4 hours. And this was into the 5th or 6th hour of an outage. So I had to bring along a flashlight, wishing I had a third hand. I should also mention at my age, 77, I have peripheral neuropathy, a condition that affects my balance, so this wasn't particularly safe. After the second power failure, I purchased a bicyclist's helmet so that I could wear this on my head with a light so that I could see what was going on. Had Pepco been proactive and transparent about the possibility of a second and third outage, I wouldn't have stayed. We would have gone elsewhere, obviously. Now, there was a second incident that I think really explains everything here and just ties this into a bow. This was the last of the 3 outages. Power went out about 7 a.m. I'd taken the dog out already and came back. At about 2 p.m., he decided he had to go out again. Power's out. I put on my bicycle headlamp, go down into a pitch black stairwell, take him out. We walk around the neighborhood for an hour. I come back, and when I enter the building, I see a gentleman from the Department of Health at the front desk. Wow, they're here to check on our seniors. They're here to see if we're good. They're here. Nope. The gentleman was there because he wanted to go up onto the rooftop to inspect our swimming pool, checking on the pH factor of the water. He had no idea of the power situation from the Department of Health. He was doing his job. He was a fine gentleman. But that's the takeaway in his story. Pepco never told Hacima the actual scope of the outages because they don't speak the same language. And so Hacima, following the DC protocol, didn't issue the emergency alerts, and the rest of the DC government and the media had little or no idea what was really going on. And the kicker to this story, the way to finish this, is beyond belief. While this gentleman was standing there trying to figure what his next step would be, when he should come again or whatever, the lights went back on. What can I say? DC Department, maybe he helped bring the lights back on. Maybe he had some magic power. But in any event, what we have here is a massive failure to communicate on every level. What happened to me was one of 1,000 things that happen to other people. But our daily lives depend on electricity. And those of us, especially in high-rise buildings, we can't just walk out the door. And especially those among us who, as you pointed out, may have medical conditions or may simply be unable to walk down many flights of steps. This directly affects our lives. We need to know so that we can get out of Dodge, so that we can take informed steps to protect ourselves and our health and our safety. And we need to work together on this. And I want to thank you for holding this hearing. And I want to thank Brian Romanowski, especially of your staff, for being in touch, and Alex Marshall, because as I went around to the various apartment houses, the various condos, to get the facts and figures, virtually every concierge or desk attendant or resident manager that I talked to said the same thing. During these outages, they were overwhelmed, and they kept using the word overwhelmed, by residents wanting to know, what is the situation? When is the power going back on? What should we do? You can't magically put the power back on, but it doesn't take magic to tell us what's going on. Please do that. That's it.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Silverstein. And I know you said you weren't here expecting an apology, but let me be the first to say I am very sorry for what you experienced. It's not acceptable. And we are all going to work to do better for everybody. So thank you for sharing that. And I will also note, someone else was going to come testify today, but about their experience with an outage, and they are now unable to connect via Zoom because of the outage they are experiencing in Foggy Bottom. That we now have an update from Pepco that power may not be restored until midnight tonight. So that will be 19 hours without power. So I think as we continue to have this conversation today and moving forward, you are completely right that we need transparency in addition to a new game plan, because people are adults and need just access to truthful information. I also want to note that, my committee, of course, does not have oversight over PSC. That's with the Committee on Business and Economic Development. But I do believe that these are issues that are so connected to public safety, and of course, HCMA's role, and that's why we are having this hearing today. I want to ask a little bit about some of the communication issues, Commissioner, both for what you experienced, but also what you think would be a better path forward in the future, especially around kind of what should trigger an incident that then communicates with HCMA to communicate with the public.
Yeah, I would start by saying PEPCO had fantastic communications to ANC commissioners. They had no communications to the general public. So I was getting constant updates every few hours from PEPCO staff about why the outage occurred, how long it might occur. And I was asking them, put this in a press release, go on camera with local TV news, get this message out there, and they refused to do so. They didn't put out tweets about it. So I was given a wealth of information that they refused to disseminate directly to people on the ground. And as we talked a lot about in 2B, the vast majority of people live in large apartment buildings. I believe the majority of my constituents who were facing the outages lived in buildings that had at least 50, in some cases up to 150 units. And what I consistently told PEPCO and the mayor's office was it would not take much to send a person to these buildings to talk with the building manager and say, here's the situation, here's what you can expect, what are you going through? And consistently they refused to do so. So I took it upon myself and wrote up flyers and plastered them around the neighborhood and went to building managers and said, can you please get this information out to your residents? And I started collecting email addresses. Mind you, I'm a volunteer. PEPCO is a massive corporation. Exelon is a Fortune 200 company, multinational. They've got a market cap, I believe it's between 40 and 50 billion. And they're acting like they don't have the communications shop of a small nonprofit. It was absolutely despicable to me that PEPCO had the resources, had the communication skills to communicate to volunteers, but would not get that information out. And so what's particularly frustrating is that we went through this twice. We went through this in February. In March at our ANC meeting, we invited PEPCO representatives and a lot showed up. And we got apologies. We got, these are great ideas. We will consider them. And then in July, when we had our second outage during extreme weather, none of those were acted upon. So PEPCO had a toolbook that the ANC gave them that would have been relatively simple. I understand some of the things like getting, their hotline adjusted so that non-account holders could learn about an outage. It takes a while. Look how many folks are here in suits. It would have taken just a couple hours to talk to the folks in apartment buildings, the managers, and say, this is what we're expecting. Here's what you should know. Here's how to get a hold of us. That didn't happen. Regarding the threshold, I don't know what exactly the threshold should be regarding number of people affected, but it should certainly be people affected, not customers. I think we've heard extensively about the fact that in large buildings, the number of customers is significantly unrepresentative of the number of people impacted. And so that's something where I would urge PEPCO and HCMA to work together to use census data to correlate customer counts with actual population counts. And I think also, some of the response just publicly was based on that too, that, when PEPCO finally did put information out, it was, we've got 500 customers affected. And so that's what the media was running with. And I was saying, we've got somewhere north of 2,000 people. And so, there was, with HCMA, there was a specific number, I believe it was 1,500 customers that was a threshold in order to trigger a DC alert. And that wasn't met. And we were able to successfully lobby for that to happen in the July outage, an exception, because we knew there were well more than 1,500 people. But that system just doesn't make sense. It provides a lower standard or a second class response for residents of multifamily buildings compared to those in single family buildings. Multifamily buildings tend to be home to people lower income. It's just not an adequate response. It's inequitable.
Thank you very much. And Commissioner Gore, you talked a little bit about this in terms of the incident transparency reports. From your estimation, what do you think should be the trigger for the standard of when an incident should result in an incident transparency report?
Thank you for the question. And I kind of look at my public safety background when I think about that answer. And I understand the need and the last commissioner's explanation regarding the number of people affected. But in our incident, we didn't have a lot of people affected, but we had a live arcing event and we had live wires on the ground. So I think there has to be a combination of in terms of the number of impact to the community. But when I think about what I would call a critical incident, that's harm to the community or harm to individuals. So when our resident Dania Palanker talked about that wire being on the ground and the smoke and the explosions that they were hearing in the neighborhood and the response time and the apparent absolutely lack of coordination between PEPCO and our emergency response folks, that should definitely, to me, be a trigger. Anytime where you could have like an immediate public harm or threat to the community. And that's an example of it. In that one incident where she talked about the wire was live, that it actually damaged their stone. I mean, that's a lot of heat, that's a lot of risk. And we had community members out there. And I think also, Councilmember, what I'm hearing today from the various witnesses is just this process is so haphazard. One witness talked about great communication with the ANC, and my colleague could opine after me. I think our communication with PEPCO was horrible. I don't remember great communication with PEPCO. There is no any communication with PEPCO. And in a different aspect, Valerie talked about their interaction with Public Service Commission. We have not had that much interaction with them. I believe that's what she talked about, or maybe Office of People Counsel. We had really great interaction with Office of People's Counsel, who was very responsive to us and really helped us navigate. This is new. I've only experienced power outages as a resident. To experience it as an ANC commissioner and chair, it's very troubling. It's very scary. And what scared me most, and what I try to, in my written testimony, you see what I focus on, is that live arcing event. I mean, that should never happen in neighborhoods. We have got to demand that PEPCO get to these scenes with our emergency response. That should be critical incident. And I'm not familiar about how HCMA defines critical incident, and I know that's typically defined in policy, but I think you're also correct at the onset where you talked about the changing environment of our grid, the changing demands. What are we going to see? In my old world in law enforcement, we talked about resiliency. How resilient are our communities, to combat this stuff? And I think when we talk about what the trigger is, we have to consider all of that. So that's my two thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you very much. That's helpful. And Mr. Blow, you looked like you were agreeing or had something to add to what Commissioner Gore was saying.
Just that in my experience, the DC Public Service Commission has not been really helpful. In February, for the February outages, it felt like I had to drag an answer out of them. But the Office of the People's Counsel has been responsive, especially to the latest outages in this month.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of future communications, I'm hearing a lot of the need to get information directly to residents, not just defining the outages as customers. Are there any other ideas that folks have around the best way to get information to people, especially if the power is out? We talked about local TV. People might not be able to watch TV, or people might have internet impacts. And so given the areas that you represent, what are some of the best methods, in your view, to get information to residents who are impacted? Go ahead, Commissioner Marshall.
Going into neighborhoods and talking to people, especially in DuPont Circle. I mean, we had I would say about 90% of the people affected lived in 10 buildings. And what I consistently told PEPCO, what I consistently told the mayor's office is, all you have to do is send someone to talk to the building's front desk staff. I'm not asking you to knock every door, talk to all 2,000 residents, but if you deploy someone to the building's front desk staff, that makes a big impact in neighborhoods like mine that are multifamily. And because no one else was doing it, I went and did it myself. It took a couple hours, and every single person I spoke to said, We haven't heard from Pepco. We haven't heard from the city. We don't know what's going on. And so, you know, the TV was more so to draw attention to Pepco's failures than to get information to residents. And that did help. Pepco did make changes after that. But I consistently said, get on the ground, talk to people in these neighborhoods, put up flyers. You know, we got great help from our MOCR, Tayabilla, who was fantastic. But one thing I would say, though, is that the mayor has 25 staff members in the Office of Community Relations. Where were they? What is the point of having 25 community relations employees if they're not going to deploy in an emergency like that? They weren't on the ground. You know, Pepco, we couldn't get anyone from them on the ground outside from the frontline workers. And so, you know, people were going up to frontline workers, interrupting their work, asking for questions. It should have been folks from their corporate office coming through and doing things. You know, in the second outage, after the power finally came on, you recall they brought in a big RV, tucked it on a side street and said, you can come here to get information. You know, putting that right in the middle of New Hampshire Avenue on day 2 might have been more reassuring. But it was a gesture that was small and late. But yeah, I mean, there was really no Pepco staff on the ground, no DC government staff on the ground. Every single person I talked to in both outages had said, we haven't heard from anyone. And because we know electricity was down, the best ways really would have been to be on the ground.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Ruckauer, go ahead.
Yeah, so, you know, what Commissioner Marshall says, you know, is definitely part of it. The other part is they have got, you know, the army of communicators who show up to people hearing, who show up for various other, you know, events. They can never be around when customers are in need of information or support. There definitely needs to be something that requires Pepco to actually know how many people are affected. At least have some idea. They can easily get that information in the district government. Probably already have in terms of the number of units in a building that is a service to us. They have this information. They're just not connecting that. The council, I think, needs to change the rules that says that no, you will do this, and also have accountability standards in there. That's really not there. There's nothing, there's really nothing that says you have to do this or be penalized in some meaningful way. There's they come back and say, well, we need a rate increase because we've done a lousy job of maintaining stuff and telling people, keep the public informed. Something that would probably work for reaching the masses is to have HCM do a reverse 911 call. That's done in a lot of other areas. Notify customer, residents of problems. There's no reason why. I mean, pretty much everyone has a cell phone now. So that send them a message, and that it's easy to figure out if a number is a line. So dial that number and have an automated recording. Tell them that yes, there's a problem, and people sources of they should reach out to for continued updates. And then there's the whole thing about begging their feet about who, or I'm sorry, just there's no clear policy in terms of who gets a generator, who doesn't get a generator. A lot of hotels should do. I'm sorry.
Interrupt you. It's just a little bit. You're a little bit choppy.
Oh yeah, I'm seeing some weird happening here. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Chair Patel.
Thank you for recognizing me, Chairwoman. Just to kind of, and this is not meant to be a Pepco bashing session, and I know there's like a lot of frustration, amongst the public, amongst ANC colleagues here, but I think it just goes back to the fact that my constituents feel like Pepco is just not transparent with them at all. And like, it's because Pepco is so worried about safeguarding their image and their reputation. Human beings are suffering for it. Number one. Like, number two, it's, you know, if Pepco would sit here and just say, okay, we don't know when the power is coming on, let people decide what they can and cannot do. Because Pepco is not being transparent, then we can't notify HCMA to take care of the vulnerable residents that need help. I mean, my residents are now facing 19 hours without power. That is going to be loss of food, loss of resources. It's cold, and they're saying midnight right now. So is Pepco going to sit here and say, okay, you know what? Let us defray some of this cost that you're incurring, as Commissioner Ruckauer said, everybody is seeing their utilities sky high, and everybody is just feeling Pepco as not being held accountable for any of their actions. People are able to and willing to pay for services, but when those services are not being done in an ethical and fair way, I mean, I don't know if this is in the purview of the Office of the Attorney General, but I think the Office of the Attorney General now needs to take a case on behalf of the District of Columbia's residents and sue Pepco. Like, this is not acceptable. What is Pepco going to do? Sit here and cry and say, hey, we can't do this, we can't do that. I'm tired of the excuses from Pepco. Pepco needs to address this community and say, with concrete deliverables, what are you going to do to fix it? Okay, I'm tired of the apologies. We're tired of the apologies. We are tired of the I'm sorries. Pepco needs to sit here and say, we acknowledge that these things have happened, and these are the things we are going to do to course correct so that we can very much mitigate that there will be little to no damages moving forward. Because there needs to be some serious, serious thought behind this. Not having another roundtable again in a few months because all of this will happen again. We need to have some concrete solutions. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Commissioner Gore?
Thank you. On the communication issue, I was just going to add that, there's multi-levels. So definitely agency level, when we talked about involving HCMA, alert DC, I think that would be helpful to make sure that they're coordinating in that aspect. But then in terms of customer notification, I know in our area, and maybe Dania could talk a little bit about this, but I heard, that we had residents that were out of town, didn't even know that, what had happened. Neighbors were calling folks on their cell phone out of town to alert them to the incident. We were trying to, myself and Commissioner Fennessy were trying to contact neighbors, especially those that were out of town. They had any damage to their appliances, because we were learning about the damages as we were going. So there has to be a better game plan on the customer notification and the communication with customers. And I think the best way to really, really do that is, I believe Jeffrey mentioned that, it's boots on the ground. That's what me and Commissioner Fennessy did. We walked, we did door to door, we did our listservs, we did all kinds of different ways to communicate with our neighbors about the incident and the further response to it. And I definitely want to emphasize that it's not just the initial incident, but it's also the things that Valerie talked about in her testimony. What happens to our neighbors after the incident? And for them to go through what they went through, to follow the protocol, to file a claims process, and within 24 hours, their claim is automatically denied by, an act of God. And that's why I mentioned that in my verbal and written testimony. We have to do better to help our neighbors navigate this process. And what is affected by one neighborhood is affected by all. Like currently, the Public Service Commission has agreed to open an investigation into our incident. I haven't heard that from the Ward 2 folks. And I'm not sure if they experienced the same type of appliance damage that our neighbors experienced with the surge and everything. but we have to have also more consistency in what we're communicating and what we're doing in the follow-up.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's such a good point, and it comes back to whether it's around communications, whether it's around who's getting the generators, is like a need to have a consistent protocol so that everybody is on the same page. Like, of course, ideally, we wouldn't have any outages, but we know in the world that we live in, we might have outages, and so we need to have some consistency so everybody understands what's happening. Go ahead, Mr. Silverstein.
As far as informing people, boots on the ground are great, and that's part of a two-part. The other part is to reform the best thing you can do is alert DC. And you need to put together a different way of determining. And you can have your 2,500 customer accounts, but there should be a second category for buildings that are above, say, 4 stories that have more than, say, 50 residential units. So that way, I mean, as a city, that's all we're building now is large buildings.
Right.
You can't afford the other. And just do that.
Thank you. Okay, final word from Mr. Marshall.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I will say that in part because of the way the second outage worked, where there were sporadic moments where power was on, a lot of folks were able to have self-service for a bit because they would be able to charge it before the power went off again and then conserve their batteries. So we do know that Alert DC would reach those people. 2 real quick items I want to talk about. Commissioner Gore talked about act of God and Pepco's refusal to pay for damages and losses. In my case, many businesses lost significant revenue. One of the outages was caused by a lightning strike. The other one, I never heard a reason other than that Pepco had aging infrastructure of their own that was interior that failed. I don't know how on earth that is an act of God. It is an act of Pepco not maintaining their resources. But, you know, Pepco told me, act of God, we're not going to be able to cover anything. That's BS to me, part of my language. And then with regards to some of the responses, one thing that I was hearing from both Pepco and DC government is that they both felt like the other entity should have been doing various things. And so I had folks in the mayor's office saying, we hear you, these are good ideas to send someone to an apartment building and talk about it. But if we start doing that, Pepco's going to expect us to do that. And so we don't want to do that and get stuck in that. Pepco was saying, we don't have the resources for that. It'd be great if you can get them to do that. I mean, who does the buck stop with when it comes to that? Because both the mayor's office and Pepco said it's not on us. Someone's got to take responsibility.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that's such an important point. And we hear this a lot in a lot of different contexts around the precedent that something could set. And I think it's so important, especially in emergency situations, that we are just getting resources to those who need them immediately, and not have this kind of protective mindset of, oh, well, if we do this in this one instance, then it's going to change all of our protocol moving forward. That maybe the protocol should be changed moving forward to get information to people where they need it. So thank you very much. Thank you all for testifying. I'm very sorry again for what you all have experienced, and want to thank everybody here, and especially the ANC commissioners, for what you have done to really step up and represent your communities and making sure that people have access to information in a time that is scary with no power and dealing with losing power in some of your instances in your own homes while you're also trying to serve your community. And so me and my team have really been grateful to have all of your partnership in these instances, and we're committed to moving forward a game plan that's going to be better and that's going to work moving forward. So thank you all very much.
Yeah. And thank you and your staff. Really appreciate
Thank you
it.
for holding this hearing.
Thank you all. Okay, we are going to turn to our government witnesses today. Joining us is Amber Perry, the Vice President of Governmental and External Affairs and Region President at Pepco, and Clint Osborne, the Director of the Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency. You can both join. Thank you. Welcome. And will you have anyone, Ms. Perry, joining you from your team? Will you turn the
I will have two others joining me.
Okay, great. If you can please introduce your name and position for the record.
Good morning.
The microphone's got to be turned on. There we go. Yep.
Good morning. Sam Williams, Vice President of Electric Distribution at Pepco Holdings.
Morning, Chris Taylor, Director of Large Customer Services for Pepco.
Great, thank you. And welcome, Director Osborne. As some of you may know, it is our tradition to swear in all government witnesses who appear before it. So if I can ask you all to turn your microphone on and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to provide before the Council of the District of Columbia and this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Do.
Thank you all. I'd now like to invite you to make any opening statement that you may have. We can start with you, Ms. Perry.
Okay. Good morning, Chairperson Pinto and members of the committee and staff. My name is Amber Perry. I serve as the Region President for Pepco here in the District of Columbia. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss Pepco's reliability performance related to 3 recent outage events, our response efforts, and lessons learned. Over the past decade, Pepco has made measurable progress in improving electric reliability across the district. As a result of our investments in the local energy grid, Pepco customers have experienced a 57% decrease in outages over the last 10 years. In 2024, when outages did occur, our crews averaged restoration of service within 39 minutes system-wide, which is the best on record performance. These results mean that customers in the district experience fewer interruptions and faster restorations than ever before. Performance levels that consistently exceed the reliability of benchmarks set by the DC Public Service Commission. Pepco continues to rank among the top performing utilities nationally for both outage frequency and duration, delivering best-in-class reliability to our customers. Behind those numbers is a simple truth. Our grid is stronger, smarter, and more resilient than it has ever been. Reliability is not just a technical metric, it is an economic and community enabler. A reliable grid supports the district's clean energy goals, facilitates electrification of transportation, and provides the backbone for resilient infrastructure in schools, hospitals, and government facilities. As the district continues to grow and modernize, Pepco's reliability performance underpins that progress. We are proud to be a trusted partner in ensuring the city's infrastructure keeps pace with its aspirations. From the development of the RFK campus and the renovation of Capital One Arena to new housing, small businesses, and community resilience hubs across our neighborhoods. At Pepco, our mission is simple, but steadfast to provide safe and reliable energy to every customer we serve. We recognize that our performance is measured not just by the power we deliver, but by the trust we build in our customers, our partners in district government, and communities that we depend on. This year, when presented with disruptions in our system, from the manhole fire on 21st and M Streets Northwest in February, to the faulted equipment at our 22nd Street substation in July, and the fire event at our Benning Service Center in September, we responded to restore service safely and as quickly as possible. We coordinated closely with district agencies, including first responders, Pepco customers, the public, and relevant community stakeholders. We understand that reliability and resilience are not one-time achievements. They are ongoing commitments. Pepco remains focused on continuous improvement, transparent communication, and collaboration with the DC Council, the Mayor's Office, our district agency partners, and community stakeholders to ensure our system is stronger, more resilient, and prepared for the future. And with that, I will now turn it over to Sam Williams, who is our Pepco Holdings Vice President of Electric Operations, to provide an overview of each incident and our response.
Okay, thank you very much, Amber. And good morning, Chairperson Pinto and members of the committee. Again, I'm Sam Williams, Vice President of Electric Operations at Pepco Holdings.
And excuse me, Mr. Williams, you can turn your microphone off while he's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'd like to take a moment to provide context and transparency regarding the 3 operational incidents we experienced in 2025 and how we're applying the lessons learned from each. Okay, so the first event that I'll speak to is the manhole fire at 21st Street and M Streets. On Friday, February 21st at approximately 4:30 a.m., a fire occurred in a manhole located at the corner of 21st Street and M Streets, impacting several feeders that provide service to portions of DuPont Circle, the West End, and Foggy Bottom. Pepco crews arrived on site around 5:50 a.m. and identified an active fire involving multiple affected structures. Given the extent of the damage, crews worked through the morning to secure the area and ensure the equipment was safe for assessment. Due to the scope of the incident and its effect on underground infrastructure, we fully replaced 7 distribution feeders and multiple sets of secondary cable, ultimately replacing 3,000 feet of primary and secondary underground cable. Pepco activated its incident management team to provide continuous coordination and response efforts until restoration was complete. All repairs were finalized and service was fully restored on Sunday, February 23rd at approximately 9:30 a.m. In total, approximately 1,200 Pepco customer accounts were affected, including approximately 3 master meter buildings affected by this incident. Due to Pepco serving a diverse range of customers, it is difficult to quantify the exact number of residents impacted, as that is not something we are currently able to track. Further, the fire and resulting outages were determined to have originated from an underground cable fault. The manhole at 2100 M Street Northwest was last inspected on July 20th, 2023, prior to the event on February 21st, 2025. At that time, there were no visible cable defects. Following restoration, Pepco conducted
Over the last 75 years, HCEMA's mission has been to prevent, protect against, respond to, mitigate, and recover from threats and hazards in the district. During significant utility disruptions, HCEMA has three main responsibilities. First, we provide public notification on the incident based on information from the utility and other partners. Second, we serve as the coordinating point between the utility and district government agencies as the utility works to restore service. And three, we coordinate a multi-agency response and recovery efforts for the community. While HCEMA routinely collaborates with PEPCO and is in constant contact with PEPCO during power outages, it is important to note that HCEMA's role in responding to power outages is distinct from PEPCO's, and the same applies for our other utility partners. HCEMA's focus is on the impact utility disruptions have on government services, community, and the business. We work to minimize the impact of utility disruptions on our ability to deliver government services to the public, monitor the status of critical infrastructure, and ensure the safety of district residents and visitors. Our utility partners are responsible for investigating the cause, implementing solutions, and mitigating future disruptions. To give you a better idea of how this behind-the-scenes coordination works, I'd like to walk you through a timeline of the district's response to the West End power outage in February. This outage resulted from a fire that occurred in the early morning hours of February 21, 2025, you heard here today. It affected more than 1,000 PEPCO customers, and permanent power was restored by PEPCO by 9:30 a.m. on Sunday, February 23rd. At 4:52 on February 21st, HCEMA was notified of an active vault fire at the intersection of 21st and M Streets Northwest. At 5:15 a.m., the Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, reported that traffic signal power outages at nearby intersections. 2 minutes later, at 5:17 a.m., we sent out an Alert EC notification about fire department activity in the area. By 6:11 a.m., PEPCO was on the scene. Due to the vault fire issues that you've heard about, PEPCO provided us a damage assessment closer to 1 in the afternoon. Once we received PEPCO's damage assessment, we coordinated with the Department of Human Services to assist residents. At 5:15 p.m., DHS began transporting clients of the Aston, which had lost power, to a nearby Salvation Army Center. That's a transitional shelter facility that we have, or transitional housing facility. HCEMA also coordinated extensively with the Department of Aging and Community Living, DACL, and the Mayor's Office of Community Relations and Services, the MOCRS, to support our most vulnerable residents. On Saturday, February 22nd at 11:25 a.m., we met on site with PEPCO's Government Affairs and External Affairs team for an update and to align our public messaging. At 1:45 p.m., HCEMA also convened an interagency emergency coordination call with the district government agencies and PEPCO. These calls are a standard part of our complex incident management response. It really allows our agencies and partners to share information, coordinate ongoing operations, and identify any unmet needs that we've been notified of from the community. HCEMA staff continued to meet regularly with PEPCO and responding agencies until power was fully restored. While operations continued in the impacted neighborhood, HCEMA continued to send information to the public so that residents were aware of ongoing events and could plan accordingly. During the West End outage, 4 public Alert EC notifications were sent. One on February 21st about fire department activity, one on February 22nd about road closures due to utility repairs, one on February 23rd announcing the restoration of power and the reopening of closed roadways. As HCEMA and the district respond to utility outages, we consistently look for opportunities to improve our internal processes, to increase efficiency, and to streamline coordination. For example, when an outage occurred in the Golden Triangle area this July, when we discussed, HCEMA scheduled coordination calls with PEPCO and partner agencies. We started earlier, we had them more frequently, and we worked to increase information sharing. Throughout that outage and the extensive repair work to follow, which you've heard about from the PEPCO folks, HCEMA held daily coordination calls to receive updates from PEPCO. We coordinated their work with district agencies who could support PEPCO and the impacted residents, and we aligned our outreach and messaging. Throughout that incident, the Department of Public Works relocated vehicles in work areas, and the District Department of Transportation removed trees and provided traffic control in that area to allow PEPCO to work as quickly as possible. And our team at HCEMA stayed in constant contact with PEPCO until the work was complete. Power outages and utility disruptions are just one example that highlights the importance of our coordinating role. No matter the cause of an incident, HCEMA works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to track incidents, assess the impacts on residents and visitors, and anticipate the district's needs. We rely on internal plans and procedures, which we regularly test, update, improve, and reinforce through training. We look at those plans and policies and procedures after every one of these incidents, and we look for ways to improve. Power outages and other incidents can be very disruptive for our community. I once lived through a 2-week power outage where I cooked all of our meals on a gas stove outside of my house. So I understand the impact to our residents. As recent incidents across the country have shown, and other witnesses have testified this morning, government cannot respond alone. In addition to continued collaboration with our utility partners like PEPCO, HCMA collaborates with residents, businesses, and local community groups to increase preparedness and resilience across the district. Just last month, I joined Director Richard Jackson from the District Department of the Energy and the Environment and leaders from volunteer organizations across the district at arena stage to celebrate National Preparedness Month. We discussed the importance of family and business preparedness, and we discussed all of the ways, big and small, that emergencies can impact our community. The nationwide impact in extreme disasters has shown time and again that resilient households and communities recover far more quickly and require less government support than those who are unprepared. To support this, HCMA maintains ready.dc.gov, a website that includes information on how to build an emergency kit, create an emergency plan for your family, stay informed during emergencies, and connect with neighbors. It also educates the community on the types of emergencies the district may face. We also strongly encourage all residents and visitors, as you've heard here today in the district, to sign up for Alert DC for free real-time updates about utility outages, traffic closures, and other emergencies. I'd like to close by thanking the first responders that manage these fires and the emergency responders, including PEPCO's frontline workers and the repair crews who worked under very challenging conditions to restore power. Finally, I want to thank the team at HCMA, always ready, standing by, monitoring our community to support our residents, businesses, and visitors. I thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Director Osborne, and thank you all for being here today. And I appreciate the kind of review of some of the incidents, but what kind of stands out to me a little bit in this is that we have aligned incentives when it comes to getting power back up and running. I have no doubt that it is in PEPCO's best interest when there is an outage to get service back up and running as quickly as possible, just as it is for HCMA, just as it is for our constituents, residents, businesses. But what still seems to be missing is the aligned incentive around communication and how we are communicating what is happening in live time with impacted stakeholders. And so I want to first understand, as we think about definitions and how we're qualifying customers that are impacted. And you heard a little bit of our public testimony from our ANC commissioners kind of ask the question, why is it that we are only counting customers being impacted when a resident might be part of a larger multifamily building and be a person impacted, even though they themselves are not the PEPCO customer? What is your thinking there? And could we change that definition?
Yes, and Councilmember Pinto, I actually asked Chris Taylor to cover that, who is very close to some of the connection points and the communication coordination across agencies, specifically to some of the testimony that we heard earlier.
Sure.
Great. So thank you very much for the question. And definitely it's a very important question. And I think, specifically it's the master meter buildings that we want to talk about. And for us, it's just so critical to get information out, not only to, the customer on record, but, residents of any building, or more broadly, the public as well. We know that these are also businesses too. So people that work at these buildings or restaurants. And so, specifically for the master meter buildings, in the first outage in February, it was about 3 to 5 master meter buildings that were impacted. And then also the July event, that was 16 master meter building that were impacted as well. And definitely, we know that that's a residential master meter building, and that, there's more than one person there as part of our response. And so if you'd like, I can try to talk through how we communicate to these types of customers as well.
Sure. But before you do, would you be open to change? Can you change that definition so that, like in the case of Mr. Silverstein, when he called to get an update and he was told, you're not a customer, so we can't give you an update, like, couldn't we just change the protocol so that if you are a resident impacted or live in a building that is a customer, you qualify as a customer?
I think for that example, I think the resident of the master meter building when the process is working, should still be able to call us, 1-877-PEPCO-62, and then get information. Though he didn't have the phone number on file or the account number on file, he can zero out, or if the phone number isn't recognized, it should default to a live agent. And then we can see that this is a master metered account, that we can provide information about the outage to that individual. It doesn't matter that that person isn't on file for that account.
Okay.
We won't share information about like billing or other information that we can't share, but that individual should be able to call us and get updates there. We also have the website too, the outage map that folks can also go to. That's being updated, I think, every 10 minutes during outage events. So that's a great place for information as well.
Okay, but when you say they should be able to, that didn't happen in this case with several other residents I spoke to as well. So is that a training gap in the people who are answering the phones, or how can we make sure that if it should be given to them, that that's actually communicated to all PEPCO staff?
Yeah, as I was hearing the testimony this morning, I was definitely communicating with the leader of our call center, sharing this exact feedback as well. So that's something that we will be talking to our reps about in terms of master metered and that process as well.
Okay, and would that also be open to change for how we are defining the scope of the outage? So like this morning, for instance, when I got the update that there were 130 customers impacted, that doesn't give me any insight as to how many residents are impacted.
Yeah, and it's tough for us to know how many people live behind, live at a place, be it, at a residential home, individual home, standalone home, or an apartment building. And so for us, how we treat it is based on the number of meters that are impacted as part of the outage. I think there's a lot of different examples of, there's, master metered residential buildings. We're also working with universities, so the dorms that are behind the dorms. There's a lot of students that live on campus. That if there's an outage at a university, we know that that's one customer to us, but there's a lot of impact there as well. And then also the housing authority too. That for us, we don't have the full list of who's in each unit, but we want to make sure that we are communicating effectively through all of our channels. I think for the master metered customer, it's important to just try to cover a bunch of different communication channels so that the message gets out more broadly, and then where possible, coordinating with the property management companies as well, and which we try to do, really in both of these incidents as well.
Mm-hmm. I guess I can see that more for single family residents of maybe you wouldn't have information as to how many children they have, or if there are house guests or something like that. But for a apartment building, it seems like a simple question to ask when someone becomes a customer: how many units are in your building, or how many residents are we servicing?
Right. And I think in my mind, when there's an outage in this area, my spidey sense goes up. This is a very dense area, that any outage is important, especially, in very dense communities. And so, I think right now this is how it's defined. We have tried to think through how else we can communicate to the residents of a master meter building. Customers can actually sign up for alerts. And so we push communication through alerts to, the customer. But then we have seen customers actually create distribution lists on their own to then essentially designate who they want to receive these updates to. And so the way our system's set up now, when customers sign up for outage alerts, they can identify 10 additional points of contact. And so we've seen property management companies create a distribution list that essentially takes our messages and automatically pushes out to the residents as well. So I think that's an opportunity that we as a company have to try to get that tool out more broadly for this specific master meter customer scenario as well.
Okay, and I mean, I can see that making sense in some areas. I think the February incident in particular, I mean, there are multiple buildings who would have thought they would have been the designated point person, never received any information.
Yeah. And I think for February, myself and several others went down on site, M Street, N Street, as well, and went to those property management companies, went into the lobbies, tried to get contact information of the folks that are at the desk to provide them information, not only in person there, but sending them updates as we are setting estimated times of restoration or providing additional updates so that pressure gets alleviated off of them. Because, when you're going to see them on site, you can see that, every person that comes in is asking, them, is there an update? Have you heard anything? So we definitely want to, provide as much information as possible we can to those individuals as well.
So what are we doing in the meantime then to collect all that contact information so that next time, if there is another outage, like the one that we're in today, you're not having your team in the middle of an emergency go out to try to figure out who the point person is?
Yep. And actually, I think this is something that we try to push more broadly, for all customers, is to update their contact information. We generally do pushes, right before summertime for storm season, as well as right before wintertime, before, winter cold periods, to update their contact information, and then to include information about multiple designations for outage communication. I definitely think that, again, for the master meter building example, we can try to think through more areas of opportunity to collaborate, be it with AOBA or other, folks such as the bids as well.
Okay. I guess it just feels like now we're in the middle of October and we should be doing a big campaign now to get access to all of those people and have a master list. Because, and something I'll ask Director Osborne as we think about the city's role and how HCMA can be and is involved in the coordination of this. I mean, what is your trigger point for when HCMA's role becomes more central in the coordination of an emergency response following a power outage?
So we are always monitoring for impacts and outages. We have a feed of PEPCO's data coming in that goes up on a dashboard. Our folks are watching for that. We do have, from time to time, small outages as systems blip all over the city all the time. What we do is when we feel like, when we look at an outage and we see the size start to grow, we see the location, we've talked about building density, we've talked about locations. What we do is we will run an assessment through one of our tools where we look at the map and we drop a pin where we roughly think the power outage is. If PEPCO can tell us, the intersection of the vault or something like that, we'll drop a pin, we'll throw a ring around that pin, and we'll look at all of the infrastructure that we have that we track through city systems. That's your hospitals, that's your nursing homes, that's your senior day centers, other things, right? And our goal when an incident happens is, and I talked about this during my testimony, our focus is not on individual residential needs. Any resident who has an emergency during a power outage or any time, who has a medical emergency, should contact 911. Any resident who needs assistance from city services can always call 311. To my knowledge, during all three of these events, there wasn't a single 911 or 311 call that wasn't addressed. And so that allows us to focus more on checking in with all those partners that I talked about, right? We're going to talk to the health department. They're going to work through their network, the hospitals, the other healthcare providers, dialysis centers, things like that. We're going to talk to the DACL, Aging Community Living. They're going to reach out. They're going to look at time of day, buildings impacted, and addresses, and they're going to say, hey, we've got lunch service for seniors in those buildings. We've got to make sure we address that, right? If there's a particularly challenging issue that we can flag, that's when we'll reach out to PEPCO and say, hey, we want to make sure you guys are tracking this one. They might look at their critical customer data and say, yeah, we're also tracking that. And then the last thing we do, and we did this in both cases for the West End fires, is we threw up in the grid and we said, where do we have a public service site that we're already operating where our residents can go to get, to use a restroom, to charge devices. And in both cases, the West End Library was available. In at least one of those cases, we identified an interest from the community working with your office, the ANCs, to extend hours. And Public Library Police actually extended hours on that site. And in the second case, we opened and we monitored for that. We didn't need to extend hours. So we provide those types of general services where people can go have their immediate needs met.
Okay. I guess just in terms of a standardization though, like the Aston you raise as an example, which is a transitional housing site. I went to the Aston on that first day of the outage in February, probably around 5 p.m. and no one had heard from anybody. The staff was sitting at the front covered in blankets. It was freezing and one of the elevators was out. And then, we were able to work together and I appreciate all the effort to get folks moved into another location. But as was just talked about, that outage started at 5 a.m. So that was almost 12 hours without any contact. And it's not as though we didn't know about that building. That is squarely in the center of where the outage was. It's 100 vulnerable residents. So I guess I'm just trying to understand again, so that it's not so ad hoc when inevitably another outage happens somewhere in the city. Like, shouldn't that have been among the first outreaches to the Aston immediately after we figured out that there was an outage?
Well, I'd have to defer to the Department of Human Services because that's their customer relationship right there. We work through agencies, right? So there's a lot of different links here. I think the other thing, I do think you bring up an important point that I think we sometimes miss in these conversations is duration drives a lot of our decisions. Displacing people from their homes is a uniquely challenging experience for the residents themselves. You raised business issues. Businesses have to make decisions about whether to open that day, whether to open the next day, right? And so duration matters a lot. I have to defer to PEPCO on the challenges with forecasting duration and things like that. I take your note about the Aston. I think the other challenge we have with standardization is 2,500 customers that is a threshold for alerting. That is not a threshold it is a threshold for alerting that we've worked on over time with PEPCO and the emergency management staff at PEPCO because we have to have a starting point threshold for basically like when we automatically trigger a notification. But what we also know is that there are a lot of power outages that happen that don't meet that threshold. And we recognize that. And that's why our process is to monitor all power outages and then do that analysis of the impacts and then take action, within our networks of different agencies that have different customer relationships. The other thing I think that's important is standardization isn't necessarily the solution. When we go to a different part of town, 2,500 is a very different number. So what we do is we standardize around impacts. We look at the same impacts every time. Do we have vulnerable populations? Do we have healthcare facilities? Do we have seniors? Do we have schools impacted, right? That is where we standardize. And I think PEPCO would tell you that they standardize around some of their key metrics, which are a little bit different from ours because they're really focused on restoration while we focus more on understanding impacts to the community. And so when we're making those decisions, a lot of the challenge comes when we have to make decisions that are like relocating people that are really thorny and really hard on the residents themselves. The other thing, well, I'll leave that. I'll come back for the next question with another point. But I think those are some of the considerations that we make. And I do want to emphasize that we do standardize around our assessment of these. So that regardless of the number and regardless of where it is, right, to say 1,000 wouldn't matter if there was a healthcare facility in there. We would still be dialed in on that if there's a healthcare facility, if it's one customer out, right? And there are plenty of examples of where that's the case.
Right. And that makes sense. But I guess as maybe not a trigger metric, but as a baseline metric, it feels like the number of people is a better determinant than the number of customers, given our past conversation that is not always a full picture of all in a building.
Right, and we're aware of that. And this is an ongoing conversation with PEPCO. They have a challenge with presenting us with more granular data than just customers because that's what their system presents them with. We're looking at some options on how to get more granular than that. But I think it doesn't change necessarily the district's response, because all of our residents have access to 911 and 311 if they have an emergency. We have the ability to analyze the critical infrastructure in any size impacted area. Now, that does require a conversation with PEPCO at the time of an outage, because one would think that there's an outage here, there's a ring or a box around it, but that's actually not how their system is designed. We've learned over time that a lot of times their system looks like an octopus because of the way the lines are run. So what we do early in an incident is we try to work with them, and as quickly as they can tell us, like, these are the zones of primary impact, we try to get in there and look at that. Again, we look at what critical infrastructure is in there. But that's why I say standardization isn't always around the number. I know that the number is something we've talked about a lot today, but I really believe that the assessment of impacts to the community and the assessment to critical infrastructure systems is really what matters here.
Okay. This is an imperfect analogy, but I'm thinking about our OUC 911 call lines. And technically, they'll work with, in a hotel, for instance, they'll work with the hotel, and the hotel is their customer, so to speak, but they have then granular information to determine how many hotel rooms have a phone line, and then that becomes part of their charging system, like of how the hotel's charged, because they're charged per line. So can't we just redesign the PEPCO system to have these buildings just say on the application how many units are in them? Even if it's not how many residents, just how many units?
And Chris, I don't know if you want to take this one, and then I'll have a follow-up on it.
Sure. And, Sam, feel free to jump in as well. I think the way we meter a building is oftentimes based on the service application that the customer or the builder developer, gives us. And so we are looking at, load demand, the equipment, that's going to be inside that building. And so we are taking that to look at, the capacity of our feeders that serve that area. But the number of meters that are installed are really based on the service application in collaboration with the builder and developer.
Yeah, and I get that for the current standard. I guess I'm just asking, can't we just change that so that there's a line in the application that says how many units do you have?
Yes, I mean, I think we're always looking for, as much information as possible. It's a matter of, communicating that externally, during an outage event. I think that's something that we can follow up on. Yeah. But I think, the application process, I think more generally, new buildings don't have master meters. We, kind of preparing for this meeting, we checked with our peers with BGE and ComEd, and asked about, what do you do in a master meter type situation? How do you communicate to customers? Are you still seeing new buildings come up with master metered configuration? And it's generally moving away from that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a process to communicate effectively with these customers as well.
Okay, so we'll put that on our follow-up list of looking at that application.
And Councilmember Pinto, I do want to mention, we have taken notes. I think we really appreciate the feedback overall that we heard today. Certainly the testimony of the customers, the leaders of the ANC. We've all taken notes today. We will be taking these back to our internal teams so that we can really assess some of the improvements, potential improvements. After every incident, we perform a lessons learned. I think in addition to that, we want to take all the feedback that we've received today to really assess where we can implement and improve even further, because our focus is always on continuous improvement and operational excellence for our customers.
Thank you. Whose responsibility is it to coordinate response after an outage?
Can you clarify, like, what do you mean coordinate response? Like, are you talking about there's an outage and you're sending out field crews? I'm just trying to see where the question should be directed. That's all.
If there is an outage that impacts any amount of your customers, residents, whose responsibility is it to communicate that outage and the game plan with the impacted stakeholders?
I would say it's, we have systems in place, right, that kind of pick up what's transpiring in the field as best we can, right? We have a operation control center. They'll see outages per se. They'll see that something's going on the system, and based on what is in the system in terms of customers and, assets, et cetera, they'll be able to kind of ascertain what kind of outage it is and what kind of response we should send. We listened to some of the ANC chairs, and customers talk about having an outage that had sparking wires and down lines. We can't see that from a system. So we have to get boots on the ground or listen to maybe calls of people that called in and say, hey, there's a wire down and it's sparking, right? So that'll give us an idea of how we want to respond. We may not send one person to assess. We may send crews immediately because we know that there's wires down. Right. So kind of like it's a collaboration of information from maybe customer calls, but also what we see from our systems that determine what kind of assets we send.
Okay. And I hear that from a process perspective that sometimes it depends and there's a lot of different inputs, but whose responsibility is it to communicate to the stakeholders what's going on?
Yep, and I think during larger events such as this, or large storms as well, as part of our incident command structure, we set up essentially we call it the JIC. It's a Joint Information Command, and so it's field into the communication teams so that when we can provide updates to our IVRs, to our outage maps, to the push updates as well. So for the larger storms, it's very structured. A lot of folks have that second role. And so it's just representatives from customer, part of the customer operations team, as well as government external affairs, and then regulatory. It's really anybody that's touching an external person through the JIC. And then that coordination is also taking place with HCMA as well through this incident command structure too.
Okay, but you see, this is making me a little nervous about the and alsos.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have an entity or even a person whose responsibility the coordination and communication is, then I worry we're going to keep having gaps. I mean, even Director Osborne, I know HCMA does a lot to try to coordinate this the best you can, whether it's an outage or a lot of the other emergencies you're dealing with. But even your last comment around, well, that's really a DHS function, makes total sense. But then where does the buck stop?
And I think, at least from us, and feel free to jump in, y'all, is that for the IMTs, there is a JIC director that the buck stops with that person. With the IMT, it's from the operations side too.
You have an event, you have a JIC lead, then you have folks that report in. So you'll have somebody that reports into dealing with folks out of the governmental external affairs office. So, you all, as council members or somebody, an external stakeholder may be getting the updates from that person. Customers can get information from our systems where we're putting ETR data. Just like one of the council members said, they know that, midnight is the estimated time of restoration, right? If we find out more information while we're out there, we'll update that ETR, say it moves from midnight to 9 p.m. That's our way of reaching, just say they said hundreds of customers, but thousands of people at once. So it's like your biggest shot to reach multiple people. Or if you opt in, you can say, hey, when I have an outage, I want to be text. When I have an outage, I want to be called. When I have an outage, I want to be emailed. It's up to the customer to say, hey, what's my form of communication? Because some elderly people may not have email, or they may not have that kind of thing, right? So tell us how you want to be communicated with. And that's how, when we push out the update, that's how you get your update, right? So it's not like one kind of throat to choke per se. There's different stakeholder groups that folks are responsible, or systems are responsible for outreach.
And when are people supposed to tell you how they prefer to be communicated with?
I think it's part Yes.
Yeah. And that's through my account. And so that's through the alerts and notifications section, and they can sign up, kind of customize who they want to be communicated with based on the type of alert or update. And so it could be, outage, it could be billing related, it could be payment related. We have weekly usage reports that go out as well. So you can just kind of through the preference center, notate that. So, anybody can do that today, update that in the preference center.
Okay, so would that be a recommendation for you all for all of your customers and residents in the city to update your preference on the preference center? Where can they find that?
Yep. And so it's on just pepco.com through my account. My account is you create a profile and then from there, the preference center is where you would then, identify who you want to receive updates.
Okay, so we'll say that again. Pepco.com, my account, preference center.
That's right.
And you can update how you want to receive information. I think that's important step for us all to be taking. I would say now, meaning when we're not in an outage, although we happen to be in an outage. Okay, so that reminded me of something else that I'm forgetting now. I'll come back to that. So what are we doing now to prevent against possible outages in the infrastructure going into winter?
We have winter readiness, steps that each organization, the electric distribution organization, the transmission organization, steps that we take based off of lessons learned in the past of how we can put preventative measures in place to kind of prevent outages from occurring. You're not going to prevent all outages from occurring. There's still going to be some things that happen, but we can do preventative things do inspections on, critical infrastructure that we know that may have had some issues in the past. So we'll have a list of like some of our worst performing feeders is what we'll call them. And we'll say, hey, let's do a ride along on that feeder to make sure things that have been an issue in the past aren't present. So say if it's a heavily wooded feeder that we've had outages on in the past, that we know it's during a time where you're going to start seeing, trees either like dying, stuff like that, foliage, going away, stuff like that. We may say, hey, ride these 10 feeders out. Some people may say, why don't you just go replace those 10 feeders? You get into economics at that, point, you can't replace everything, right? So you have replacement strategies in place for some of your worst performing assets, but also you have maintenance, maybe increased maintenance around areas where you may have seen some incidents over others.
Okay. Just one more thought on metered buildings. Can you all provide a list of all of the metered buildings that you service in the District of Columbia to the committee?
Master meter?
Yes.
Yeah. As long as there's no privacy concerns. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
We'll follow up on that.
I think that would be a good next step. And then we can make sure that with HCMA, we have contact information for a point person. And that way, if there's an outage in a particular area, we can overlay that with the response and make sure that we do better next time. What type of version of that information do we have, Director, from a city asset perspective? Do we have something like that that would include other residential buildings in the city?
Can you just ask that a different
And
way?
with clearer words, yes. Does HCMA or the city maintain a list of residential buildings throughout the district?
That's actually something we're looking into because of some of these events that we've had. We're looking into what other, whether it's Department of Buildings data or tax data, revenue data, to look for some of those connection points where it yields better information. So that, again, we're always we want to get better and better and better at assessing the impacts. And traditionally, we it's actually almost just as fast because we don't know the exact location of an outage. It's like really, this is a really critical point. We don't exactly know what buildings are out, right? Even the Petco folks, they'll tell us like general area. The map, as you know, if you zoom in, gets you to a certain point. So we know zones. So what we'll do is we'll actually drop a pin on Google Maps or another one of our GIS, and we'll basically like run the area visually to see what buildings are in there. We can get a really quick assessment because again, remember, it's not necessarily about the individual number of customers. What we're looking to do is form a picture of the overall impacts and our ability, which is really nice because we can do it from anywhere, phone, computer. As soon as we get an address or a general location, we can go through, we can jump in on a map, we can move around, we can get a general sense of that. And that's really what we're after. Again, I do want to stress that what we're really focused on in that assessment is what are the government services buildings, what are the lifeline buildings and the critical infrastructure like hospitals, healthcare, and things like that. So we already pull a lot of that in. And then some of it is just a matter of throwing a ring around it and then working with Pepco as they get better fidelity on the outage zone to go in and check things off. And what, I talked about DHS and DC Health, what they do is they go through their own relationship lists and they'll call down and say like, hey, how are you guys on power, right? They'll check the hospitals, then they'll confirm with us all the hospitals have regular power. So that's how we do that. I think that we absolutely want to look for more information and we're in the process of doing that.
Okay, I think that would be a very worthwhile investment because it just feels a little ad hoc. Like, to use another imperfect analogy, most buildings have a fire evacuation plan, right? And so we know, like in this building, for instance, if there's a fire, how many rooms there are, who the point of contact is for each office to make sure that our staff are protected and that we can evacuate the building and account for everybody. And it just seems like from an emergency preparedness perspective, we should have the same thing for the city. Like, God forbid it was a flood or something that we needed to know where are our residents, which buildings were impacted, have we accounted for a contact in each building, feels very important for our emergency preparedness moving forward. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the payment issues. We heard from some of our witnesses about this. There are, of course, examples of individual customers who may lose all the food in their fridge during a power outage. There were hotels that lost, I don't know all the exact numbers. Some are estimated tens of thousands of dollars of damages from lost hotel stays. There were conferences that had to be rebooked. There were office buildings who told their staff not to come in during these outages, which then affected not only the office, but our economy in the Central Business District and DuPont Circle and West End that relies on those workers there. So how does Pepco think about the monetary damages, whether that be to residential customers or business customers following an outage? What do you think is fair?
And I'll cover that one, council member. So, really for us, all claims that are received, by Pepco are investigated thoroughly, and decisions are made on a case-by-case basis, depending on the details. We can't specifically comment on each and every one of the claims just due to privacy laws for our customers that prohibit us from actually talking about those. So we do thoroughly investigate them and take each one very seriously because we do know an outage is a significant inconvenience for our customers. So each one is actually assessed individually with different detail.
Okay. Let me try phrasing this a different way. Do you have a policy around how you consider payment of damages?
We do have a policy. I don't know what that policy is, but we can follow up if you'd like additional information on that.
Okay, that would be great. I would be curious to see that both for individual residents and their impacts and also for businesses who are impacted following an outage. And it's possible that policy depends on the cause of the incident, but that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does Pepco maintain a list of customers or buildings that require emergency power, like the need of elevators or commercial refrigeration needs or temperature controlled products?
We do generally, so for the large customers, typically, that's part of what we do is, with annual visits, when we check in with customers, we inquire about the status of their generators, the status of the backup power as well. So that's something that we do ask about, and then try to keep track of it as well.
Okay, and then so during an outage, is there proactive outreach to those buildings?
Yes, yep, definitely. And so, some of the buildings that were impacted both in February and in July had their own generation. And so they had various levels of generation, be it, life and safety. So that's kind of the stairwells and lobbies. And then others had more robust generation and backup.
Okay. So then in terms of the damages for compensation, are all of those handled only when someone brings a proactive claim against Pepco, or is there any affirmative steps on Pepco's behalf to reach out to provide damages?
Councilmember, I don't know that information. So when we send over the policy, we'll include that information.
Okay, okay, thank you. Do you have the totals of how much has been paid out in 2024, 2025 of damages?
I do not have that information with me. No.
That would be helpful as well. Okay, so back to kind of protocol. And I'm hearing you, Mr. Williams, but some of it depends, and you have the incident team and determining what the extent of the outage is. At what point does Pepco bring in HCMA from Pepco's perspective? Like HCMA might be aware through other means, but at what point do you say, okay, now we're going to call HCMA?
When we have your, like a standard outage, which is just like a single event, 100 or so people, we aren't really reaching out to HCMA unless it's like an event like one of the ones that we just described. So the manhole event, they were involved in that. The 22nd Street substation event, they were involved in that. I'm not 100% about the Benning fire or not. But
we were communicating with Pepco. We were tracking it. We weren't on site, I don't believe.
But the other two, I'm certain that they were, because we had internal conversations with government external affairs about how information was being disseminated from our organization to HCMA, to, governmental agencies, et cetera. It was a lot of information going out, and we were like, hey, let's bring it in, make sure we update HCMA before so they can do their job.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think for those incidents, that is my recollection of them as well. But I'm trying to understand not what happened in those two, but what is the protocol for when Pepco says, okay, there is an outage and now we're going to bring in the city because we may need some partnership with setting up a warming center, communicating
When
with
we're
it.
setting up our incident command team, when we're having all of our stakeholder folks, we'll get together sometime physically, or it can be virtually. Sometime we'll do a incident command kind of light, but most of the times, once we have an event such as that, and we're standing up an incident command center, they're part of that stand up. But if we're not standing up an incident command center, and it hasn't reached a level where it's like a major event, then it's kind of like conversations, they're calling us, or we're reaching out to them, through one of our contacts to give them updates.
And what would you define as a major event?
We have sometimes it's not around the number, like the Benning fire it wasn't any outages, but it was a significant event, right? So sometimes things could be in a significant event just based off of what's going on with an asset. Significant event could be amount of customers out, et cetera, right? Or if it's something that's going to go on long duration, we know we need like 24/7 presence to manage it. We'll set up we'll call it a significant event and have a IMT stood up.
Okay. I think what may be useful too is to just have clarity around who that point person is. Like again, the government affairs team is very responsive and is regularly in contact with me or with the ANCs when these issues happen. I think the gap that we're trying to figure out is how a resident who might not be getting their information through my Twitter channel can just have access to information about what's going on in their account. And so what I'm trying to understand with the questions around like who's making those decisions is who is that point person from Pepco, and can that person's just like name and phone number be basically everywhere so that everyone knows who to call?
I know it kind of seems that cut and dry, but a utility, as you can imagine, is complex, right? The event that happened with the manholes, and this could be like, you guys could care less maybe about this, but the event that happened with the manholes in February, that was a distribution event. So distribution events are pretty much like your standard delivery kind of service to residential and, commercial buildings and such, right? So it's a manhole fire. So the distribution folks ran that restoration effort, right? So you have a system incident commander, you standing up an incident command, you have the system incident command, which rotates, right? You're not going to be the system incident commander the whole year. Like I may have it for a week, Amber may have it for a week, et cetera. And so it's a rotational position. But whenever you have an incident, there's a system incident commander for that week. That anything that goes on that week, that's the point person. They're in the room, they're running the incident, right? So it's you could get my number, but then call me about something and I'm not.
But it seems like what you're talking about is from a operations perspective.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is a communications perspective.
So there's a person who has a role. Everybody has like a secondary role is what we call it. And there'll be somebody from the customer organization, the person who's the JIC, as Chris talked about. That JIC is a rotational position. And whoever the JIC is, they're inside of that room. And that's their responsibility to kind of run point on outside communication, right? So again, it wouldn't be like a person per se, it would be a position during an incident.
Is there a number that we have for the JIC?
Well, and I guess, trying to bifurcate here, and I think the interactions between, HCMA and our emergency preparedness team, that's for the coordination of the critical customers and, decisions on operations and city resources. I think that the general public residents, as well as customers and, folks that live in the master meter buildings, they shouldn't be contacting our emergency preparedness rep. That's for that communication between HCMA and us. I think for the residents that we're talking about, we want to really have multi-channels that they are getting information from, be it through, social media, Twitter. I appreciate that you're also sharing information as well, but we want to provide that information obviously too, take some pressure off you. And then, through our outage maps, through being able to call us and, through our 877 PEPCO 62 number as well. And then, the other channels such as, us doing the door-to-door during these outage events. And I just, for folks listening, live or in the future, that there shouldn't be people, general public, trying to reach, our individual that's coordinating with HCMA. It's more our general numbers that would be where they can get information from.
It's just such a unique situation. I mean, you service over 300,000 residents or customers. So maybe every resident in some way. And so I feel like some of the perspective of the response is as though you're operating a standard business, but it's not a standard business. It's a utility that we all rely on. And so I understand the goal is to push out information, and like there's not going to be one person who gives out their cell phone number to 700,000 residents or maybe 1 million with all the business stakeholders are coming in or more. But I'm just worried that it still seems a little bit I don't want to be offensive here, my word of the word rudimentary, but it feels like we're in 2025 and we should have a more sophisticated communications network and set of protocols in something as important as everybody's power in our entire city.
I mean, this may not answer the question totally, but I think this is why I remember years ago, I've been at this 32 years now, with Exelon in the operations space. I remember when we didn't have ETRs. I remember folks, clamoring like, hey, I don't have any idea when my power, just give me an idea when it's going to come back on. Right. And then we were able to finally come up with a system 5-6 years ago where we could put information out with our outage maps, with our online tools that would show like, hey, if you are a resident that is on this feeder should be back up by this time. And that was a huge improvement. That's old technology per se for some folks. Now they're like, okay, I need something better. I need something more responsive, to the minute or something. So I think it's kind of like a effort of continuous improvement. We take this kind of feedback and we're looking at, taking in this information and say, okay, while we may think that the ETR is the bee's knees, it's giving you an idea of when, your power's going to come back so you can plan. Like if I tell you that it's coming back up at midnight, you may say, okay, I may need to do some different things because I was going to have an event at my home tonight. So now we're going to pivot. We're not going to do that, right? If you're asking for something more than that for each individual customer, I think that would be something that we would just have to kind of explore what that would look like because, like I said, we have the tell us how you want your information. You can, you got to opt into that. Some people don't opt into it. Some people opt into it. They change their number. They never update it. It's like that kind of stuff. So, so we're kind of trying it from our lens, but the customer lens is very important. So you give us feedback and maybe we can come up with a better system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate all of the progress that has been made and the technology and the information. I think that's all good steps. I'm just thinking back to February even and what we heard from one of the commissioners, and this was my experience too, is I was getting lots of information from PEPCO regularly. I mean, Strikins and I and Screenin, we were talking basically every hour. It was a lot of information, but customers weren't getting that information. So that's why I mentioned Twitter. Like I was trying to update Twitter with whatever information that I was getting. But again, like I don't have the contact information for everyone in the city. I don't know which buildings were impacted. So then it just doesn't seem like the best communications channel to then go through the government partners. Of course, we can amplify and we will always do that. So it's not that I'm saying there needs to be an individualized like call or information set to each person. It's more that there were gaps in how the information was getting through that I want to fill now so that next time there is inevitably an outage, we're not having the same conversation again of like, oh, perhaps we should collect a list of buildings in the area and perhaps we should have a sense of how many units are in them.
I don't want to offer up more than you want, but I will offer this up, right? I was a part of the 22nd Street substation, incident. And some of those decisions to proactively drop customers was what I heard bubbled up to me as like, hey, you guys lack communication in your efforts, right? And, you're trying to kind of, I don't want to use a corny analogy, but you really are walking and chewing gum at the same time. You're driving a, car while you're building it type thing. We're trying to restore service, but at the same time, as customers start to come online, they start to wake up, everybody starts to turn the TV on, everybody starts to do X. That system was down 2 feeders, usually have 4 feeders in, and those 4 feeders are there for redundancy. If one feeder goes down, you're like, look, so we got 3 up, we're good. But what happened with the initial incident, you had 2 feeders that were significantly damaged, right? That's something that very rarely happens. So now you have 2 feeders left to run that whole system. And then lo and behold, you had an incident at the substation where you had a bushing fire. So now you're down to one feeder, which if that goes out, you lose everything, right? So we're scrambling, we're trying to get at least one back up so we have that redundancy. But while we're doing that, people are coming online. They're coming online, and the amount of capacity that's needed to feed all of these folks, we know, hey, is getting near that number. We're going to lose this feeder. So you have to make some proactive decisions like that. And so you look and you say, okay, how can we mitigate this? We're going to have to, drop some customers temporarily, right? Until we can do some different things. And so to your point, you start calling folks that have their own generation. Hey, can you start using your generation so we can stop giving you power, right? So that's where the partnership with large customer comes in. They're looking in their systems. They're saying who has their own generation that's using a good amount of power that we could ask them to go on generation so they could give that power back to the grid and we can keep more customers on without having to drop power.
Yeah.
So it's those kind of split second decisions. And that happened 2 times.
And that is helpful
Yeah.
context to have. I do not hold myself out to be a infrastructure or engineering expert. I do think a lot of what you're talking about and a lot of what was in the testimony today is from the perspective of engineering or operations, which I'm glad that you all are experts to do that. But we are not suggesting, hopefully we'll get there at a later date and time of our world that we have no outages. But we're not even suggesting that. We're saying you are the experts in getting power back up and running. We want to make sure you have what you need to do that. But as you do it, we don't just need the engineering perspective, we also need the customer service perspective.
Yeah, and from the customer's perspective, I mean, like we take that so seriously, and I think that's something that not only the operations teams are 24/7, it's for us as well 24/7. Be it in the IMT structure, going to the actual field as well. We do try to share as much information as possible in the various channels that we have currently for people to get information where they want it, but definitely how we can do it better. We're open to that for sure.
Thank you. So back to the infrastructure. PEPCO, we estimate, has about $90 million of annual revenue a year. What percentage of that is spent on preventative maintenance?
I don't have a set dollar figure on that, but it's significant is all that I can say. I don't even know, I don't know what you would, look at as the amount of money we're spending on, you're saying like maintaining the system? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like you had mentioned earlier of it's not sensible, I forget the exact word you used, but it's not practicable to replace everything. Totally understand that, but trying to understand how you think through prioritization. And one of the ways I think through that is through money.
Yeah. And yeah, well, I don't have the exact figure, but from a prioritization perspective, it's, each organization kind of looks at their assets. I talked about one trigger being, your maintenance program, where so you're doing maintenance inspections. You go out, you look at assets on your system, you say, hey, just say you had 10 poles, you say, hey, these 8 poles look great. They should be good for a while, barring anything catastrophic like a tree falling or a car hitting it or whatever. But these 2, we should probably put this in the pipeline of, to be replaced, right? And so then you go out and then you look at transformers, et cetera. And then you look at performance history of assets, right? You look at the performance history of assets. Something could be older, but you could say, hey, this thing is exceeding expectation. We haven't had issues on it in forever. And so we can probably get more useful life because if we just replace it prematurely just on age, that's costing money, right? Which trickles down in the rates, et cetera, et cetera. So let that keep rolling. Don't replace it, right? And so a lot of factors come in like the age of an asset, the performance of an asset. When you go out and you inspect the condition of an asset, what you're seeing, and then you build that into your investment strategy plan. And so that number kind of moves, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, it kind of moves based off the condition of your system.
Okay. How do you think about the prioritization for backup generators? I know it depends on the location and a number of factors, but as a general matter, like, how does that analysis take place?
I think one of the first steps that we do is we kind of look at the kind of outage that we have, right?
The kind of what?
Outage. So take, for instance, the manhole outage. That was an underground outage, right? As opposed to if you had some kind of outage and it involved overhead wires. Again, I know that may not make sense to you guys, but it's a big deal on how you're going to hook up generation, right? So you have an underground outage. First thing we're going to do is we're going to talk to Chris. We're going to talk to some of our ACMA partners in general, what kind of critical customers that we know of are on the system, right? Critical could mean, oftentimes it means like, maybe hospitals or, nursing homes, things of that nature. These are critical customers that are in our system. We know that they're there. And then you're looking to see like, okay, you're a critical customer, like a water pumping station, something like that. What kind of backup generation do you have, and will you be okay, right? Will you be okay, or will you need generation to perform your critical function? Once we know that, then the next step is, okay, where could we get most bang for the buck to hook up generation if we can, to get more customers back in a timely fashion? And then also with you all reaching out to us, the Aston is a perfect example. And during that outage, there were two master meter buildings that had an issue. That was the Aston, and the other one was Newport condominiums, right? And after some time, after conversations with you all, with ACM and everybody, we were able to get generation for Aston. So of the two, we got generation for the Aston, right? Because you guys are a data point that we use to say, hey, where does generation go? And then the other condominium site, we couldn't hook up generation there because they own what's known as a LVAC, low voltage system, which is basically like a secondary underground system. And to hook generation up to that, you would basically have to dig up all of these wires, try to hook it up to this generation, and it would have been a lot of hours to do that. And you wouldn't have got honestly, the best bang for the buck, because you would have been diverting the resources that were trying to get power back for all to try to, do something that was very complex to get one building back in. So it's kind of like, you're taking all that into consideration, your critical customers, feedback from your stakeholder groups, et cetera. And I know, one thing, and finally, the one thing I know that kind of comes up sometimes, people will see generation being deployed somewhere, or they're saying like, hey, you have it hooked up there, instead of over here. There's always a backstory to kind of that stuff when you see it. So if there was anything in particular, anybody want to know about why do you have generation there, we'll be happy to try to answer it. But I will say it was a very balanced deployment of generation.
Mm-hmm. And, it reminds me too of what Director Osborne was talking about, of some of the other challenges. Like maybe it's not for the Aston, for instance, maybe transporting all of those residents to another location would have created other health challenges or concerns. And so then the prioritization of the generator becomes relevant to that consideration. I wonder if there's an opportunity to share more information about the generators when that's happening in live time, of like, okay, Pepco has just placed a generator at X hotel with like a sentence of a reason, so people are on the same page of what's going on. Because there's a lot of misinformation I find that can brew when people are feeling like, well, a generator went here and why, and who is in part of that discussion, or can I get an extra? And, one conversation I was having with Pepco during one of these is you were out of extra generators. And so you all knew that, I knew that, but the community didn't know that. So I was getting requests of, could we get a generator? Like there's no generators left. So maybe some additional push out of information when there are generators being put out or when we're out.
Okay, we will take that one back to the team as well. Another great point here. Thank you.
Thank you. So Director Osborne, I know you partner very closely with PEPCO and a lot of other agencies. I guess from your perspective, and as we think about preparedness, which is one of your many expertises, what do you need from PEPCO so that we can do better next time?
And I think that we had conversations after the February outage about communications and about, especially like we throw a lot of terms around and they also, I think, sort of like commingle, but I think really what we're talking about is communication to the community. And I think we've talked about that. And they've become much more proactive. The July event, they were much more proactive. And I will tell you that we meet with the PEPCO team from the emergency management folks that our team talks to, all the way up to the senior level once a year, once every other year at the latest, if we haven't been talking to each other all the time. And so I think just continuing that communication, I took the note on the master meter buildings. That would help us as we evaluate other data sets that we have. But I think speaking of preparedness, I'd be remiss if I just didn't take an opportunity to remind everyone how this works, right? So whenever there's an incident or an emergency that has impacts, there's a lead agency for the crisis response. And in this case, the crisis is the power outage. And so clearly PEPCO is the lead agency for the restoration of that service. And then we work together and we knit the district agencies together to support the consequences of that incident. And in this case, and I think you've done a great job of teasing out, like PEPCO has the lead for the communications and we amplify and support that. So I just think continuing to be as proactive as they can possibly be and look for different ways to get their message out to the community in a way that the community can digest and understand sort of what it means for them, given the challenges that they have with thin slicing information in dynamic situations. That's really the focus area.
Okay, thank you for that. And from HCMA's perspective, do you feel like you have enough resources available for support that you need to get out to residents when there is an outage?
Yeah, we have the team that we need in place. We have the partnerships that we have that we need to have in place. Our watch is staffed 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and they're really the intake point. I know that a lot of this was the focus on understanding PEPCO's approach to this, but I do want to reinforce that we're watching incidents that are happening all the time, whether it relates to PEPCO or it's just a fire that doesn't impact the electrical system. Right now, we're also dealing with an 8 to 10 inch water main that's going to be out for 8 or 9 hours, where we're monitoring that, right? So I think that's really essential. And Mayor Bowser and Deputy Mayor Pia, the city administrator, they've really reinforced the importance of making sure that our mission essential capabilities and our functions are strong, that we're staffed, that we have what we need to be out as quickly as possible, getting the message out to the community.
Okay, and let me ask you about one of those other issues, especially around DDOT. If there is a citywide emergency that's affecting like a bridge closure or a traffic buildup, how do you coordinate with DDOT to ensure that there's sufficient signage and things that we need to communicate that as people are trying to get around the city?
So if it's a special event, a lot of that planning goes through the citywide special event planning process, which is, we coordinate with all the agencies. Similar to incident response, special event planning is the opportunity that we take for each agency to look at the design of that event and then to look at what the potential impacts are and then to design around that. So when you see for special events, you'll see signage out, variable message boards, you'll see rerouting. A lot of that we push through Alert DC, MPD's traffic social media accounts will also push that stuff. And then during incidents, we follow a similar process. It's just not pre-planned. We look at the event. Sometimes we don't have a ton of notice. Sometimes things will happen. And what we'll do, because the DDOT Traffic Management Center is co-located with the City Watch Center, same room, same space, same monitors that we can look at. Our teams are constantly talking to each other to say like, hey, we have an incident going on over here. do you have rope units available? And if they have them, or they have variable message boards, or they have a message board that they can control in that area, they'll do that. So that's how we look at that. It really depends a lot if you have a specific incident in mind. It really depends a lot on things like time of day, the duration, the expected duration of the incident. As you know, oftentimes just by the time we can get a resource out to a site, an issue will resolve. It'll resolve on its own. So those are the factors that we look at, but that's how we work. We look over to them or we just look over to them and say, hey, here's the situation. Do you have resources you can put to that? And if they can, they will.
Okay. I guess there were two incidents that I had in mind. One was last Friday. Georgetown Key Bridge had 24 hours of closure without any traffic management. And then we reached out to HCMA, and then during the July outage that we've spent a lot of time talking about today, the Fresh Farm DuPont Circle Farmers Market was just kind of doing their own traffic management and felt like they were without city resources and support. So I'm trying to understand too, like, when does something get to you? Or I guess let's think about the February and July power outages. Like, you personally, when were you called, or how do you find out about these things?
So we have a number of chats and channels that we're constantly monitoring. Specifically about the farmers market, I'm going to take that as a note. We'll go back and take a look at that and get back to you with some additional information. That may have just been something that in the Russian hubbub that we missed an opportunity to support them better. And so I'll take that as an area of inquiry going forward. I'm also looking into Friday to the Key Bridge situation. We're still analyzing that. So I will get back to you with more information on that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And this may be the first hearing I've been a part of that the official record will include hubbub. So happy to hear. Okay, so one of the things we all talked about in July, and to your point, Mr. Williams, of understanding the distinction between the wires and the underground, Ms. Greenan did give me a very helpful explanation of the resiliency that I helped me understand that perspective much more. So thank you for that. We talked about improvements that need to take place moving forward. So I guess my question to really anybody, either on the PEPCO side or the HCMA side, and HCMA and MOKER's folks were part of these conversations too, what improvements have been made since July to better prepare for a communications network that reaches people where they are?
Yeah, no, I think for the July event, you saw a little more intentional engagement, with the boots on the ground on the 24th. We did print flyers that were dropped off at some of the buildings as well. We did try to create that engagement with the property management companies and then provide communication to them, through emails as well following that particular event. So at least on the customer side, that's one we talked about. I think in front of the difference between the February event is, it was an event that started on one day and it extended for several days. The challenge of the July event was one that happened over multiple days, start, stop. And so I think being self-reflective, one of the things we had thought about was, hey, maybe we could have done the door-to-door sooner in that process versus, when we did that as well. So, that's definitely a tactic that as we have, especially these underground events that take a lot longer to restore, that, we are incorporating as well.
Okay. Back to the generators for a moment. How many backup generators does PEPCO have? Sure.
So,
Hi.
thank you, Commissioner Pinto, and welcome to you and staff. Sorry, I'm Nigel Ross. I'm the Director of Transmission and Substation Engineering for PHI. The generators that we have is not only generators that we have for PEPCO, we are larger PHI family. So between the PHI family of generators, we have about 9 megawatts of generation that we can
And so what
deploy.
does PHI stand for?
Pepco Holdings Incorporated. So it encompasses Pepco, Delmarva, and Atlantic City Electrics.
Right, okay.
And at any time, similar to the event that we've seen in July, we would reach out to our partners in Delaware as well as Atlantic City to bring that generation down to help us offload some of those needs of the customers that we've seen. In addition to the generators that we personally own, we have contracts with folks that have generators that support us as well.
Okay. Um,
And-
I'm hearing some it depends.
Well, and I also have a response to your question around where we deploy generators and if they still have them left and available. It depends on the situation. So a couple of factors that go in our generation deployment is one, real estate, right? It's where we can physically put it. Another is the general size of that generator. And to Mr. Williams's point, the best, for lack of a better term, bang for the buck, right? Where we can deploy. So in the July instance, all the generators that we deployed were for load relief of the substation. It weren't for restoration of the customer. Where in the February event, when we make the decisions around installing generators to particular customers, residential, commercials, it's where we work with our community partners, HSEMA, to see where those most vulnerable and critical customers are, as well as the configuration where we can install them and the real estate to where we put those generators. But again, we only have limited amount of generators that we can install and deploy at the time.
And so at what point during a major outage do those generators get transported to the sites?
So the event in July, when we initially lost the first 2 feeders that we had, we made calls to our sister utilities as well as our contracting partners to get as much generation here as we possibly could. During this event, all of the generation we had was not installed because, again, it was more for load relief of the substation than for customer restoration.
Okay, but how long did that?
You said, how long did it take?
Yeah.
So the generators that we got from DPL, we had them here in a day. We have Pepco generators on site. And the generator that we had from ACE, it took about 2 days to get it down on property. But again, through this entire event, all of those generators weren't deployed because, again, strategically, we wanted to make sure that we put them places that, like I said, got the best bang for the buck. And we maintain consistent service other than the instances that Mr. Williams was talking about earlier when we lost that 3rd feed from the substation.
And how does that relate to the estimated time of restoration? Like if you think.
Yeah, to say one thing. Just to bifurcate the two, right, incidents. The distribution one with the manholes, there were outages. People were out, right, from inception. So we were using generation to get people back in, right, and decisions are made. Where should they go? Talk through that whole kind of process of what we look at, right? And so that was a 2-day event, right? The 22nd Street event, even though we had those 3 outages that I talked about, whereas you had the first one where you had the lines fail, right? We were kind of still good because we had 2 in. It was like a serious incident, but no kind of like outages per se. Once we started getting to that point where it's like, okay, so much load's coming on, we need to drop customers, right? So to his point, the generation now isn't so much used to get those folks back in as it is to put more capacity on a system that's lost from those 2 feeders being out. So we strategically place those where we can now, even if people start waking up and they start putting stress on that other feeder I talked about, we have generation on the system to handle the ramp up, right? So one was to get people back in per se. The other one was to give the system load, right?
Yeah, no, I understand. And that's why it is so important to have you all so centrally involved in the decision of where they go so that all those other impacts can be accommodated for. I guess I'm trying to understand to the earlier comments you were making around it depends on when we're estimating restoration comes back up. Like for today, for instance, the estimated restoration time is midnight. So will there be a deployment of generators today, or is it only when there's overnight outages expected?
I was gonna, what she's saying for today. So I was gonna let Rob Spellman. Rob Spellman is our manager of underground lines. He works, so he was an integral part of the manhole fires. He knows about Foggy Bottom. So he can also answer your question you asked at the beginning, like for the update. All right.
Great. Hi.
Appreciate it. So just to answer your question.
Could you also say your name and your
Yes.
title for the record?
Rob Spellman. My title is Senior Manager of Construction and Maintenance at Pepco. So my teams are directly responsible for the response and maintenance and outage correction for what happens in the city. So just to answer your question, the generation on the event that's ongoing right now, we have proactively made the decision that we are going to deploy generation to some of the affected customers to help shorten some of that duration that these customers will expect to see today.
Okay, where will those generators be deployed?
I have the addresses that are on my phone. I can get those sent out to you and we can share that. I just don't have them right in front of me.
Okay, have they been shared with those residents yet?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, so maybe we could use today as our first trial case of getting the information, not just to me, but to the residents themselves.
Yeah, I'm fairly confident that we are going door to door at those residences to share that information. And the folks that are home are going to see the presence and they're going to see what's happening. And additionally, I think the ETRs for those customers have been updated in the system for when they are going to restore service, if it is ahead of the rest of the customer base.
Okay, and then is there notice about the ETR on your website
Yes,
and the impacted area?
that'll be on the customer facing outage map, correct?
Okay, and will this get an alert DC message sent out to the impacted customers? And why is that?
Because it's below our alerting threshold. And we don't, as far as I'm tracking, as far as our team's aware, I've been here with you this whole time. But if it doesn't trigger a larger critical infrastructure impact, then no, it will not.
Okay, so are there going to be other efforts underway to get information to those customers other than just posting it on your website?
Yeah, I think at this point, we have the customer facing outage map that posts that information with the estimated restoration times. Additionally, what we do, and we're very cognizant of the situation that these customers have experienced this year. So what we do in those cases, we also offer outbound calls that come from our call center. And I think in this case, it definitely warrants one of those for some of these customers.
Okay, I'm just a little nervous. I feel like we've spent all morning talking about all the things that we're going to do next time.
Yeah.
And next time is right now. But that doesn't sound very different than what happened at the previous two events.
And you have to want to make sure that we also get the most up-to-date information, right? We were here and we're getting this real-time information. So we might have already made some of those proactive customer calls. It's just not something that we might know in this room directly.
So I'm getting past notes. So we are working on an outbound call on social media, but I apologize, we've been in the chair. So, we'll get more information for you.
Okay, great. So let's have that as our mission today, to get those outbound calls and proactive social media posts and affirmation to those impacted customers from Pepco to them. Okay, great. Okay. Just a couple other follow-up questions so we understand. So how much is the 9 megawatts in terms of a city block or a building, to the earlier conversations of what area like has enough outage or voltage?
So it really varies depending on the type of load that we're experiencing, but a general rule of thumb is that outage that took place in February, just to put it into perspective, was about 20 megawatts of load.
20 megawatts, sorry, say again? 20
megawatts of load in total was the outage that occurred in February. So the generation capacity that Nigel was speaking about earlier is about half of that.
And what does that equate to in terms of a city, building or a block?
It's tough to justify that just because it varies so much, but I would say about a 4 square block radius is a good estimate.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. Back to the resource question, Director Osborne, when we had the outages in February and July that we've been talking about, why didn't HCMA deploy WMATA buses as warming and cooling centers, which was my understanding was more standard practice?
We, from time to time, do deploy those. As you recall, we opened the West End Library, which has a greater capacity. It has fixed facilities. It has restrooms and charging, which are, as we've talked about today, I've heard from our folks, charging is a huge issue. Can't do that on the Metro buses. So we as soon as we looked at that and figured out that we were going to have to provide level of warming and cooling, we decided that a fixed facility that we were already providing city services in that our residents would be familiar and comfortable with was the best option.
Okay. And then what about bottled water or batteries or other kind of lighting needs that certain buildings may have?
We're not really in the position to do sort of like retail level, like individual level, unit level commercial supports for these types of situations. This is where, and I appreciate you bringing this up because I think this sort of hits home to a message that we've been trying to be more strident about, which is that it is incumbent, especially as we see more of these types of situations, as climate conditions change, it's incumbent that our residents are prepared, right? We have to have the ability to sustain ourselves as residents. I'm also a resident, right? I have to be able to sustain myself for up to 3 days with some of those basic necessities. And so that is a really important part of the takeaway for today is that we have on our Ready DC website the ability, any resident can go right now to ready.dc.gov. And if you go to that site, it actually gives you the ability to add some non-specific demographics, like we heard about Rocket the dog earlier. We heard about seniors. You can go in and you can click on categories that you identify with, and our system will actually, our website will actually generate you a checklist of things to consider to prepare yourself. It is, as you've asked me about in the past, like, well, what happens when it gets bigger? Well, when it gets bigger, there are more people who have needs. And so it's really, really essential, especially those who can support themselves, that they get out and do that basic preparedness work. Build the kit, make a plan for your family. There was some great, one of the public speakers talked about having the headlamp. I have them stashed all over my house for this very reason, right? So I think that's a great question. It's a really important point, and I'm glad you called me and let me make that. Thank you.
Okay. That's a cool tool. That's good to know.
Yeah, it's actually relatively new. We launched it last year. It was a total redesign and rebuild of our ready.dc.gov website. Based on a lot of interaction with our community. Our community told us we need more tools and it needs to be easier to use. And our resilience team that thinks about resilience all the time, from critical infrastructure support all the way down to how our residents can prepare themselves, rebuilt a website that's really designed to meet people where they're at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as we think about other technology that's now available, even again, back to alerting and just like the radius that you can send a text message, the functionality is so much more sophisticated, as you know, than it was even a couple of years ago. That feels like, in addition to the Alert BC program, to have PEPCO do some of that outreach, I think will be a worthwhile investment. Okay, well, thank you all very much. I think this was informative for me. I do think there is still more work to do to get to a place where we are all on the same page around what the protocols are, who is responsible for what, and most importantly, how we're going to communicate that to our residents on an ongoing basis. I want to just go over a couple of the follow-ups that we talked about so we are all on the same page. PEPCO, we talked about a commitment to communicate with the call center to ensure that when residents are affected but aren't official customers, they can still get that information. You're going to share a list with us of all the master metered buildings. You're going to share your policy of how and when you compensate residents and businesses who are impacted by power outages, and whether or not you ever make proactive affirmative payments, as well as what those numbers were in 2024 and 2025. PEPCO is going to tell us how much you have spent or how much you are spending on preventative maintenance. PEPCO is going to identify better ways to collect information about the number of units in residential buildings, identify better communication strategies with impacted residents and businesses who are not just customers, but people, and ensure proper communication, regarding emergency generation selection points. So those are some of the follow-ups that we talked about today. And with HCMA, we talked about getting the data from DOB and others to identify multifamily housing buildings and number of units as part of your GIS asset mapping for the city. You're going to get back to us about the DuPont Circle Farmers Market issues in February without the traffic management, as well as the Georgetown Key Bridge issues, and the improved communications and coordination to support impacted residents. So those are some of the follow-ups that we have. But really appreciate you all being here today. Appreciate your shared commitment to keeping power up and running, and when it goes out, to making sure that we get it restored quickly, but communicate transparently and directly with our residents. I want to give you a chance if anyone has any closing thoughts you want to share.
Yes. No, I just want to thank you again, Councilmember Pinto, for the time today. Certainly, again, we understand, the inconveniences of outages that they have on our customers and the residents of the district. We can't commit to everything, but we certainly can commit to improving. And so we will take all of, the items that we talked about today. We'll follow up on those. We certainly don't want to see our customers in any situation where an outage is any longer or any more frequent than they need to be, and that is our commitment to our customers. And so we will certainly continue to work on the items that we discussed. We'll think about as well more proactive measures when it comes to communications. Certainly the messages were heard here today, so I just want to thank you again for the time.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you all very much. The time is now 1:01 p.m. and we are adjourned.